The most beautiful woman Elias Hart had ever seen stepped off that stagecoach, and his first thought was to send her straight back to wherever she came from. He'd asked for plain. He'd begged for ordinary. Someone who wouldn't look twice at a scarred, silent rancher living at the edge of nowhere. But Marina Hale stood in the Montana dust like she'd been carved from starlight itself. And Elias knew right then that he'd made the worst mistake of his life. Because a woman like that, she'd realize her error within a week. And when she left, she'd take every last shred of hope he had left. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The Montana Territory stretched vast and unforgiving in every direction, a land that swallowed weak men whole and spat out their bones for the ravens. Elias Hart had survived here for 8 years, carving a life from soil that fought back, wrestling cattle through winters that killed indiscriminately, and building a ranch that stood as testimony to one simple truth. A man could endure anything if he expected nothing, and Elias Hart expected nothing, especially not this. He stood at the edge of Bitterroot Station, hat pulled low, shoulders rigid beneath his worn canvas coat. October wind cut across the platform, carrying the scent of coming snow and sage. The stagecoach was late, nearly 2 hours now, and with each passing minute, Elias felt his resolve weakening, felt the voice in his head growing louder with all the reasons this was a mistake. What were you thinking sending those letters? You? With a wife? A woman foolish enough to answer your advertisement deserves better than what you can give her. He'd written the letters during last winter's worst stretch, when 3 weeks of blizzards had kept him trapped in a cabin so silent he'd started talking to his own shadow. The words had come awkwardly, his hand unpracticed with a pen, his thoughts clumsy when it came to matters of the heart, or whatever approximation of a heart still beat in his chest. Rancher, 32, seeking wife for homestead life, he'd written. Looking for a woman of practical nature. Plain is preferred. Someone who won't expect softness or city comforts. Someone who understands hardship and won't run from honest work. Must be prepared for isolation and difficult conditions. He'd been brutally honest, perhaps too honest. He'd described the ranch, 400 acres of stubborn land, a 2-room cabin that leaked when the rain came sideways, cattle that needed constant minding, and days that started before dawn and ended long after dark. He'd made it clear he was no prize, a man who spoke little, smiled less, and carried scars both visible and otherwise. Don't expect poetry or courtship, he'd written. Expect a partner for survival, nothing more, nothing less. 3 women had responded. The first had sent a letter so flowery and romantic that Elias had burned it in his stove without finishing. The second had listed demands that would have bankrupted a railroad baron, but the third letter had been different. Marina Hale's words had been simple, direct, almost spare. She'd lost her family in the war, parents, 2 brothers, everything. She'd worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia, but found city life suffocating. She wanted space, purpose, a chance to build something lasting. She didn't need poetry. She needed a place to belong. I'm not afraid of hard work, she'd written, and I'm not afraid of silence. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing 2 people can share. That line had struck something in Elias, something he'd thought long dead. He'd written back immediately, his second letter even more awkward than the first, but somehow they'd continued. 6 letters over 4 months. Her handwriting neat and precise, his handwriting rough as his hands. They'd discuss practical matters, planting seasons, livestock management, what supplies he had and what she'd need to bring. Never once had they discussed feelings or expectations beyond the basic arrangement. She'd come west, they'd marry, they'd work the land together. She'd never asked for his photograph. He'd never asked for hers. Perhaps that had been the mistake. I'm not much to look at, he'd written in his last letter, feeling the need to warn her one final time. And I don't talk much. If you're expecting a handsome husband or a man with social graces, you should know, now I'm neither of those things. But I keep my word, I work hard, and I won't mistreat you. That's all I can promise. Her response had come just 3 weeks ago. I'll arrive on the October 15th stage. I'm bringing 2 trunks and what money I have left. I expect nothing but honesty. That's all any person can promise. And now here he stood, heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape, waiting for a woman he'd never seen, who'd agreed to marry a man she'd never met, in a place that broke stronger people than either of them. The sound of harness bells and creaking wood announced the stagecoach's arrival before it rounded the bend. Elias felt his stomach drop. His hands, which could rope a steer or break a horse without trembling, shook now as he pulled them from his pockets. Last chance to run, the voice in his head whispered. Last chance to be the coward you've always been. But Elias had never run from anything in his life. And he wouldn't start now, no matter how badly he wanted to. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust. The driver, old Pete Mackenzie, climbed down with a groan and a string of curses about the road conditions. Two passengers emerged first, a merchant Elias recognized from town and a drifter who looked half-starved. Elias barely registered them. His entire focus was on the coach door, on the gloved hand that appeared in the opening, reaching for Pete's assistance. And then she stepped down. Time didn't stop. That was romantic nonsense. But something in Elias's chest sure did. His breath caught. His heart stuttered. His mind went utterly, completely blank. The woman who stood before him, brushing dust from her traveling dress with graceful hands, was not plain. She was not ordinary. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman Elias Hart had ever seen in his 32 years of living. Marina Hale stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with a figure that even her modest traveling clothes couldn't hide. Her hair, the color of honey in sunlight, was pinned up beneath a simple but elegant hat. Her face, God, her face, had the kind of delicate features that belonged in oil paintings hanging in mansions back east. High cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that curved naturally even in repose. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Large, intelligent, the color of storm clouds, they surveyed the station with a calm assessment that suggested she missed nothing. She looked like she should be attending theater openings in New York or hosting soirees in Boston drawing rooms. She looked like money and breeding and everything Elias was not. She looked, in short, like she had made a catastrophic mistake in answering his advertisement. No, he thought desperately. No, this isn't right. This can't be her. But then her eyes found his across the platform, and recognition flickered there. She'd asked in one of her letters what he'd be wearing. "I'll be the only fool in a brown canvas coat standing alone at the station," he'd written. And now her gaze traveled over that exact coat, over his work-worn appearance, and something settled in her expression. She walked toward him, her steps steady despite what must have been a bone-jarring journey. As she drew closer, Elias could see details that made everything worse: the scatter of freckles across her nose, the intelligence in those eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence despite being alone in a strange place. "Mr. Hart?" Her voice was low, melodious, nothing like he'd imagined. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he could see flecks of blue in her gray eyes. "Ma'am?" The word came out rougher than he'd intended. He couldn't seem to make his throat work properly. Yes, Elias Hart. Marina Hale. Marina?" She didn't offer her hand. Perhaps she knew better than to expect that kind of propriety out here. "Thank you for meeting me." Thank you? She was thanking him? When she'd just traveled 2,000 miles to discover she'd be marrying a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same rocks that dotted his fields? "Your trunks," he managed, desperately grasping for something practical to say, something to fill the roaring silence in his head. "Pete, the trunks?" "2 of them, heavy as sin," old Pete called out, already hauling them down. "Your lady friend packed like she's planning to stay." The words lady friend made Elias want to sink into the earth. Marina Hale wasn't just a lady. She was refined in a way that made him acutely aware of every rough edge he possessed, every missing social grace, every year spent in isolation. "Let me help with those," Marina said, moving toward the trunks. "No." The word came out too sharp, and Elias saw her pause. He forced his voice softer. "No, ma'am, I'll get them. You just wait here." He moved past her, catching the faintest scent of something floral, lavender maybe, and felt his stomach twist tighter. Of course she smelled like flowers. Of course she carried herself with grace. Of course she was everything he'd specifically said he didn't want, because the universe had a sick sense of humor. The trunks were indeed heavy. Elias hoisted them both, one under each arm, more to demonstrate capability than from any real need to carry them simultaneously. His wagon waited at the edge of the station, and he loaded the trunks with perhaps more force than necessary, his mind racing. She'll leave. Give her a week. No, 3 days. And she'll realize what a mistake this was. She'll get on the next stage heading east, and you'll be alone again. Probably better that way. Definitely better. This was always a fool's errand. "Mr. Hart?" Her voice came from directly behind him, and he nearly dropped the second trunk. "I wonder if we might talk for a moment before we leave." Elias turned slowly, reminding himself to breathe. Marina stood with her hands folded in front of her, her expression composed but with something uncertain in her eyes, the first crack in that collected exterior. "Talk?" He probably sounded like an idiot, repeating her words back to her. I know this arrangement is unusual. I know we're strangers, but perhaps we could at least introduce ourselves properly before we..." She paused, and for the first time he saw color rise in her cheeks. Before we proceed? Before we proceed to what? Elias thought wildly. To you running away screaming? To you realizing I'm the worst decision you've ever made? Not much to tell, he said, hearing the defensive edge in his voice and hating it. Everything I wrote in the letters is true. I've got a ranch about 8 miles northwest, 2-room cabin, small herd. It's not much. I wasn't asking about the ranch. Her voice remained gentle, but there was steel underneath. I was asking about you. No one had asked about him, really asked, with genuine interest, in years. Elias felt cornered, exposed. Like I said, ma'am, what you see is what you get. I'm a rancher. I work the land, that's all. That's not all of any person. Marina took a small step closer, and Elias fought the urge to back up. I know this must be as strange for you as it is for me. 2 people meeting like this, planning to marry based on letters alone. I just thought we might at least. Why'd you come? The question burst out before Elias could stop it, rough and demanding. You're not what I asked for. He regretted the words immediately, but they were out now, hanging in the air between them. Marina's eyes widened slightly, and he saw her posture straighten. I beg your pardon? In my letters. His hands clenched at his sides. I said plain, practical. I said. He stopped himself before he said something worse, but the damage was done. Marina's expression shifted, something hardening there. You asked for plain, Mr. Hart? Let me assure you I've been called many things in my life, and plain is certainly among them. My needlework is plain, my cooking is plain, my conversation is plain. I'm sorry if my face doesn't meet your specifications, but I can't change what God gave me. Her voice remained level, but he heard the edge of anger beneath. And I came because I thought I'd found a man who valued substance over surface. Perhaps I was wrong. Elias felt like he'd been kicked by a horse. She thought she wasn't good enough? She thought he was rejecting her? That's not. He struggled for words. Ma'am, I didn't mean. Should I get back on the stagecoach? Her chin lifted, and despite the composure, he could see she was hurt. I saved for 2 years for this journey. I sold everything I owned. But if I'm not what you want, say so now and I'll find another way. No. The word came out too loud, too forceful. Pete and the merchant were watching now, and Elias felt heat crawl up his neck. He lowered his voice. No, you don't need to get back on the coach. I gave my word. We'll proceed as planned. Your enthusiasm is overwhelming, Marina said dryly. Despite everything, the confusion, the panic, the certainty that this was all going to end in disaster, Elias felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Was she making a joke? At a time like this? The ranch is 8 miles out, he said, changing the subject because he didn't know what else to do. Rough road. We should leave now if we want to make it before dark. Marina studied him for a long moment, and Elias had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing far more than he wanted to show. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. Very well. 8 miles. Rough road. Before dark. She moved toward the wagon with that same steady grace. I assume I sit in the wagon bed with my trunks? Front. The word came out strangled. Front seat. With me. He helped her up, or tried to. She managed the climb herself before he could properly assist, settling onto the worn bench with her skirts arranged neatly around her. Elias climbed up beside her, acutely aware of the small space they shared. The way his bulk made the seat cramped, even though Marina was not a large woman. He snapped the reins more sharply than necessary, and the horses started forward. They rode in silence. The road northwest was indeed rough, rutted from recent rains, rocky where it climbed through the foothills. The wagon jolted and swayed, and more than once Elias had to steady Marina with a hand on her arm to keep her from being thrown. Each time he touched her, even through layers of fabric, he felt that same jolt of wrongness. She was too fine for this, too delicate, too everything. The Montana landscape stretched around them in shades of gold and amber. October had painted the scattered aspens bright yellow, and the grasslands rolled like a vast ocean toward mountains that stood blue and distant on the horizon. It was beautiful country, harsh, but beautiful. Elias had thought so from the first moment he'd seen it, thought that a person could breathe out here in a way they couldn't back east, where everything felt cramped and close. It's remarkable, Marina said quietly, breaking the silence. She was looking at the landscape with wonder in her eyes. The letters you wrote. They described it well, but seeing it is different. It's hard country, Elias said, because he couldn't help himself. Couldn't stop trying to make her see what she'd gotten into. Beautiful from a distance, but it'll kill you if you're not careful. Winters that'll freeze you solid, summers that'll bake you dry, springs with floods that wash away months of work. You love it, though. It wasn't a question. Elias glanced at her, surprised. What makes you say that? Your voice changes when you talk about it, even when you're listing all the ways it can kill a person. Marina turned those storm gray eyes on him. You love it the way some people love difficult children, not despite the challenges, but because of them. Something in Elias's chest tightened. How had she seen that so quickly? He'd written about the land practically, factually, never once mentioning the way sunsets looked painted across the sky, or how the first snow felt like a benediction, or how the call of coyotes at night made him feel less alone somehow. It's home, he said simply, because that was the only truth that mattered. Yes, Marina said softly. I can see that. They fell back into silence, but this time it felt different, less fraught. Elias found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him, the way she held herself upright despite the jolting wagon, the way she kept her hands folded in her lap, the way she watched the landscape pass with genuine interest rather than fear or judgment. Half an hour into the journey, they came around a bend and Marina gasped. A small herd of pronghorn antelope stood grazing in a meadow below the road, their white markings bright against the golden grass. At the sound of the wagon, they raised their heads in unison, poised like they'd been carved from air and alertness. Oh, Marina breathed, leaning forward slightly. They're beautiful. Pronghorns, Elias said. Fastest animals in North America. They can outrun almost anything. Are they dangerous? Only if you're grass. The joke came out before he could stop it, rough and unpracticed. He felt like an idiot immediately after, but Marina surprised him by laughing, a genuine, warm sound that made something in his chest ache. Do you hunt them? No need. Plenty of other meat available, and they're too pretty to shoot. He paused. That probably sounds foolish. It sounds kind, Marina said, and there was something in her voice that made him glance over. She was looking at him now, not the antelope, and her expression had softened. You wrote in your letters that you weren't a soft man, Mr. Hart, but I think perhaps you don't give yourself enough credit. Elias felt heat crawl up his neck again. I'm practical, ma'am, that's all. No point in killing something you don't need to kill. Still, she said quietly, it's a kind way to be practical. The antelope scattered as the wagon drew closer, flowing across the meadow like water, and Marina watched them until they disappeared over a rise. Then she settled back in her seat, her hands folding neatly in her lap once more. May I ask you something, Mr. Hart? Elias tensed. I suppose. Why did you place the advertisement? You clearly value your solitude. You've built a life here alone, so why seek a wife now? It was a fair question, one he'd expected she might ask eventually. He'd just hoped for more time before having to answer it. I'm not getting younger, he said finally, keeping his eyes on the road. Ranch needs more than one person can give it. Animals need tending year-round, fields need planting and harvesting, house needs keeping. It's practical. So you wanted help? A farmhand? A partner, he corrected, perhaps too sharply. Someone to build something with, not just hired help. But not a wife in the traditional sense. Again, it wasn't really a question. You wrote that you didn't expect softness or courtship, that you wanted someone practical and plain, someone who wouldn't expect... She paused. What wouldn't I expect exactly? Elias's hands tightened on the reins. This conversation was heading into territory he'd hoped to avoid entirely. Romance, he said bluntly. I'm not built for it, ma'am. I'm not a man who knows how to say pretty things or make grand gestures. I figured it was better to be honest about that from the start, better than making promises I couldn't keep. I see. Marina was quiet for a moment. And when you said you wanted someone plain, I meant unremarkable, Elias said, the words tumbling out now like water from a broken dam. Someone who wouldn't expect more than I could give. Someone who wouldn't... He stopped himself. Wouldn't what? Wouldn't leave when she figured out what a mistake she'd made. The words came out raw, more honest than he'd intended. I asked for plain because plain would be more likely to stay, because plain wouldn't have better options waiting back wherever she came from. The silence that followed was heavy. Elias kept his eyes locked on the road, refusing to look at Marina, certain he'd see disgust or pity or anger in her face. Mr. Hart, she said finally, her voice very quiet, do you truly believe that only plain women are capable of loyalty? That beauty and faithfulness cannot coexist? He had no answer for that. My mother was beautiful, Marina continued, The most beautiful woman in Philadelphia, people said. She married my father when she was 18. He was a baker's son, kind but not wealthy, certainly not handsome. She loved him until the day she died. She never looked at another man. She worked beside him in his shop, raised 4 children, and never once complained about the life she'd chosen. Her voice carried no judgment, just fact. Beauty doesn't determine character, Mr. Hart, and plainness doesn't guarantee steadfastness. People stay or leave based on what's in their hearts, not what's on their faces. Elias felt something crack in his chest, a small fissure in the wall he'd built around himself. "I'm sorry," he said roughly, "for what I said back at the station, about you not being what I asked for. That came out wrong." "Did it?" Marina turned to look at him fully now. "Or did it come out exactly right? Be honest with me, Mr. Hart. You took one look at me and decided I'd made a mistake, that I'd leave. You've already decided this arrangement is doomed, haven't you?" He couldn't lie, not when she was looking at him like that. "Yes," he admitted. "A woman like you don't belong out here. With someone like me." "A woman like me?" Marina repeated softly. "You don't know the first thing about what kind of woman I am, Mr. Hart. You've looked at my face and decided you know everything else. That's not fair to either of us." She was right. God help him. She was absolutely right. But that didn't change the fact that every instinct he had screamed that this was wrong, that she'd realize her mistake, that he'd end up more alone than he'd started. "Give me a month," Marina said suddenly. Elias blinked. "What?" "1 month. Don't marry me tomorrow as planned. Give me 1 month to prove I can handle this life. Let me work the ranch, learn the routines, show you I'm not the delicate flower you've decided I am." Her voice was steady, determined. "If after a month you still think I'm going to leave, if I haven't proven myself capable, then we'll discuss other arrangements. But give me the chance to show you what I'm made of before you write me off entirely." "And where would you stay for this month?" Elias asked, his mind already racing ahead to the logistics. "People will talk. You can't just, I can stay in one room of your cabin and you stay in the other. Or I can stay in the barn if that's more proper." "I don't care what people say, Mr. Hart. I've survived worse than gossip." Something hard flickered in her eyes. "I've buried parents and brothers. I've worked my fingers bloody sewing to survive. I faced down men who thought a woman alone was easy prey. I can handle whatever judgment your neighbors want to throw at me." The steel in her voice surprised him. This was the woman who'd written those spare practical letters. This was the woman beneath the beautiful exterior. 1 month, he heard himself say. "But you work, really work. I won't have you doing light chores and pretending you're pulling your weight." "I wouldn't dream of it." Marina held out her hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Elias looked at her outstretched hand, small, gloved, so at odds with the calloused, scarred hand he would offer in return. But he reached out and clasped it anyway, feeling the firmness of her grip even through the fabric. 1 month, he said. "Then we decide." They shook on it, and Elias felt a strange mixture of relief and doom settle over him. He'd bought himself a month to watch this impossible arrangement fall apart, a month to prepare himself for her inevitable departure. He had no idea that he'd just agreed to the most transformative month of his entire life. The ranch appeared as they crested the last rise, and Elias found himself seeing it through Marina's eyes, trying to imagine how it looked to someone encountering it for the first time. The cabin sat in a small valley, backed against a stand of pines that would provide some windbreak come winter. It was sturdy. He'd built it himself over 2 summers, but small and plain, the logs chinked with mud, the roof patched in places. A small barn stood 50 yards away, and a fenced pasture held his small herd of 20 cattle. A vegetable garden, now mostly harvested for the season, sat behind the house. Everything was neat and functional, but there was nothing soft about it, nothing welcoming. It looked like exactly what it was. A place built for survival, not comfort. "That's it," he said, unable to keep the defensive note from his voice. "Not much, like I said." Marina was quiet for so long that Elias braced himself for disappointment, for that moment when reality would finally crack her composure. But when she spoke, her voice held something he didn't expect. "It's perfect." He jerked his head toward her. "Ma'am? It's exactly what you described. Honest, solid, built to last." Marina's eyes roamed over the homestead, and there was something almost hungry in her expression. "It's a place that means something, not like—" She stopped herself. "Not like what?" "Nothing, just— It's more than I hoped for, Mr. Hart, truly." Before Elias could process that, a high-pitched whinny cut through the air, sharp with distress. His head snapped toward the barn, every sense suddenly alert. Something's wrong, he said, already snapping the reins to hurry the horses. The wagon lurched forward, eating up the remaining distance to the barn. As they drew closer, another whinny sounded, panicked this time, followed by the sharp crack of hooves striking wood. Elias pulled the wagon to a hard stop near the barn and jumped down, his earlier awkwardness forgotten in the face of crisis. "Stay here," he called to Marina, already running for the barn door. "What's wrong?" She'd climbed down too, ignoring his instruction. "My mare. She's due to foal. Something must have started." He yanked open the barn door and was immediately hit with the sound of thrashing and the sharp scent of fear. In the largest stall, his dapple-gray mare, Tempest, was down and rolling, her sides heaving, her eyes white-rimmed with terror. Jesus! Elias vaulted the stall door, hands already assessing even as his heart sank. He'd seen this before years ago on another ranch, breech birth. The foal was positioned wrong, and if he couldn't turn it, he'd lose them both. "What can I do?" Marina's voice came from outside the stall, and Elias looked up to find her there, her face pale but her expression focused. "Nothing. Go to the house. This isn't—" "Tell me what to do," she interrupted, already pulling off her gloves. "I've helped with births before. Human births aren't—" "I didn't say human births." Marina pushed open the stall door and entered, moving carefully to keep from spooking the mare further. "My uncle had a farm outside Philadelphia. I spent summers there. I've assisted with horses, cows, even a difficult sheep birth once. Tell me what you need." Elias stared at her for half a heartbeat. This woman in her traveling dress, standing in his barn, offering to help with a potentially dangerous foaling. Then Tempest screamed again, and there was no more time for doubt. "Her head," he said quickly. "Keep her calm. Talk to her. Pet her. Whatever it takes. I need to check the position of the foal, and she's going to panic." Marina moved immediately to Tempest's head, kneeling in the straw without hesitation. Her dress, probably worth more than Elias made in a month, dragged in the dirt and manure, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She placed both hands on the mare's neck, beginning to speak in a low, steady voice. "Easy now, sweet girl, easy. You're going to be fine. We're here to help. That's it. Just breathe." Her voice was remarkable, calm, soothing, with a musical quality that seemed to cut through the mare's panic. Tempest's thrashing eased slightly, her breathing still labored but less frantic. Elias moved to the mare's hindquarters, rolling up his sleeves. What followed was tense, difficult work, his hands exploring internally, finding the foal's position, feeling the wrongness of it. One front leg tucked back, the head turned at an angle. Fatal, if he couldn't correct it. "Talk to me," Marina said quietly, never stopping her gentle ministrations on Tempest's neck. "Tell me what you're finding." "Breech," Elias grunted, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "Front leg's caught. I need to push the foal back, turn it, get the leg forward. Can you do it?" It was a fair question. The answer was he didn't know. But he said, "I have to." For the next 20 minutes, Elias worked with careful, agonizing precision. Each time Tempest contracted, he had to stop and wait, his arms aching from the strain. Marina never stopped talking to the mare, her voice a constant thread of comfort, and somehow, impossibly, it seemed to help. Tempest relaxed into Marina's touch, trusting this stranger in a way that made no sense but that Elias didn't question. "Got the leg," he said finally, relief flooding through him. "Now the head. Come on, little one, work with me here." Another contraction, another pause. Marina's voice never wavered, though when Elias glanced at her, he could see the strain in her face, the way her hair had come loose from its pins, the smudges of dirt on her cheeks. "There." The word came out on an exhale of pure relief. "Position's good. The foal's coming." And it did. A rush of motion, of fluid, of life entering the world in that messy, miraculous way that never failed to strike Elias as something close to holy. The foal slid free, a perfect dapple gray like its mother, and immediately tried to lift its oversized head. Marina laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Oh, look at you! Look at you, brave thing!" Elias quickly cleared the foal's airways, his hands working automatically even as something in his chest loosened. Alive. They were both alive. Tempest was already trying to turn, her exhaustion forgotten in the instinct to reach her baby, and Elias moved back to give her room. "Let her handle it now," he said quietly. "She knows what to do." He and Marina retreated to the stall door, both of them filthy, both breathing hard, and watched as Tempest began the ancient ritual of cleaning her foal, encouraging it to stand, welcoming it into the world with soft nickering sounds. "That was incredible," Marina whispered. She had straw in her hair, dirt on her face, and her expensive traveling dress was probably ruined. But her eyes shone as she watched the mare and foal, and Elias thought he'd never seen anyone look more alive. "You did good," he said, the words rough. "Real good. Most women would have run." "I told you," Marina said, turning those gray eyes on him. "I'm not most women." "No," Elias thought as he looked at her, really looked at her, past the beautiful face to the capable hands and the steady gaze and the strength that ran deeper than appearance. No, she certainly wasn't. "Come on," he said, reaching for the stall door. "We should let them bond, and we both need to clean up." They walked back to the house in the falling darkness, neither speaking, but the silence felt different now, changed. At the cabin door, Elias paused. "I'll heat water for washing," he said. "You can have the bedroom. I'll take the other room. Like we agreed. 1 month." Marina nodded, then surprised him by touching his arm lightly. "Thank you, Mr. Hart, for the chance to prove myself." "Thank me in a month," Elias said, "when you're still here." But as he watched her enter his home, small and certain and covered in the honest dirt of hard work, a terrible thought occurred to him. What if she did stay? What if she proved every assumption wrong? What if a month from now he'd have grown accustomed to her presence, only to watch her leave anyway for reasons he couldn't prevent? Maybe, Elias thought as he began hauling water from the well, the real danger wasn't that Marina Hale would leave. Maybe the real danger was that she'd stay just long enough for him to forget what it felt like to be alone, and that forgetting might destroy him when she was gone. The first night passed in careful silence, two strangers sharing a small space and trying not to intrude on each other's existence. Elias lay awake in the front room on his bedroll, staring at the ceiling beams he'd hewn himself, listening to the quiet sounds of Marina settling into the bedroom beyond the thin wall. Every creak of the bed frame, every soft footstep made him hyper-aware of her presence in a way that set his nerves on edge. When dawn broke gray and cold, Elias rose before the sun fully cleared the mountains, moving quietly through his morning routine. He'd started the fire and put coffee on before he realized Marina was already awake, standing in the bedroom doorway wearing a simple cotton dress he didn't recognize, nothing like the fine traveling clothes from yesterday. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Her hair was braided simply down her back, and without all the pins and styling, she looked younger somehow, more approachable. Still beautiful, nothing could change that, but more real. "Morning?" Elias turned back to the stove, uncomfortable with the domesticity of the moment. "Coffee will be ready soon. I usually head out to check the cattle right after, but I'll come with you." Marina moved into the small kitchen area, her eyes taking in the sparse furnishings with that same assessing look from yesterday. "Unless you'd prefer I stay and make breakfast?" "Can you cook?" The question came out more skeptical than he'd intended. Marina's lips curved slightly. "I can follow instructions. Do you have a cookbook?" "No." "Then I'll learn by doing. My mother always said that was the best way anyway." She poured herself coffee when Elias indicated the pot, wrapping her hands around the cup. "But this morning, I'd like to see the cattle. Understand what needs doing." Elias studied her over the rim of his own cup. Her dress was practical, sturdy fabric that looked homemade. Her boots, visible beneath her skirts, were worn but well maintained. Everything about her appearance this morning spoke to someone ready for work, not the refined woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach yesterday. "It's cold out," he warned, "and there's a lot of walking." "Mr. Hart," Marina set her cup down with a soft clink. "I agreed to prove myself over the next month. That means doing real work, not standing in the kitchen while you do everything. So unless you're going back on our agreement, I'm coming with you." There was steel beneath the polite words, and Elias found himself almost smiling. Almost. "Fine," he said, "but keep up. I won't slow down for you. I wouldn't dream of asking you to." They set out as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose, their breath misting in the cold morning air. The cattle were scattered across the near pasture, dark shapes moving slowly through grass silvered with frost. Elias walked the fence line first, checking for breaks or weak points, and Marina followed without complaint, her eyes tracking his movements, clearly trying to understand what he was looking for. "This section," Elias said, stopping at a post that leaned slightly, "needs replacing before winter. Cattle will lean on weakened fence when the snow comes, looking for the easiest path through." Marina knelt beside the post, examining where it had rotted at the base. "How do you replace it? Dig out the old post and sink a new one?" "More or less." He was surprised she'd asked. Most people would just nod and move on. "Have to dig down about 3 feet, set the new post, pack rocks and soil around it. Takes a few hours." "Show me." Elias blinked. Now? Unless you have something more urgent? Marina stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. You said I'd work. I'm ready to work. For the next 2 hours, Elias did exactly that. He showed her how to dig the post hole, harder than it looked, fighting through rocky soil. He showed her how to cut the new post to length, how to strip the bark, how to char the bottom section to prevent rot. Marina watched everything with intense focus, asking questions that showed she was truly trying to understand, not just going through motions. Can I try? She asked when he began setting the new post. Elias hesitated. It's heavy. I'm aware. Marina moved to the opposite side of the post. I'll help balance while you guide it into the hole. They worked together, Marina straining to hold her side steady, while Elias maneuvered the post into position. When it finally seated properly, Marina was breathing hard, her face flushed with effort, but her expression showed satisfaction. There, she said. That wasn't so terrible. That's one post, Elias said, unable to help himself. There are at least 20 more that'll need replacing before spring. Then we'd better pace ourselves. Marina wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt. What's next? What came next was checking the cattle themselves, a task that required walking through the herd, looking for signs of injury or illness, making sure none had wandered off. Marina followed Elias's lead, staying quiet when he needed to observe, asking questions when appropriate. When they found a young steer with a torn ear, caught on barbed wire most likely, she held the animal steady while Elias cleaned and treated the wound, never flinching at the blood or the animal's struggles. By the time they returned to the cabin for a late breakfast, Marina's fine dress was filthy, her hands were scratched, and she moved with the careful stiffness of someone whose muscles were already protesting the morning's work. But her eyes were bright, alert, and when Elias held the cabin door open for her, she met his gaze directly. Thank you, she said, for not treating me like I'm made of glass. You did good work, Elias admitted, the words coming easier than he'd expected. Better than I thought you would. Because I'm beautiful? Marina's tone was light, but there was an edge underneath. Because you're from the city, Elias corrected. Most city folk can't handle the first hour of ranch work. Well, Marina moved to the wash basin, rolling up her sleeves to reveal scratched forearms. I'm discovering I'm not most city folk, just like I'm not most women. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Elias would wake before dawn, and Marina would already be awake. They'd share coffee in companionable silence, then head out to tackle whatever work the ranch demanded. Marina threw herself into every task with a determination that bordered on fierce, learning to milk the 2 dairy cows, mucking stalls, repairing tack, even helping Elias split firewood for winter. She wasn't immediately good at everything. Her first attempt at milking left the cow irritated, and Marina with only half a pail to show for 30 minutes of effort. Her firewood splitting technique was inefficient, wasting energy on poor aim. But she never complained, never made excuses, and most importantly, she learned. By the 3rd day, she could milk both cows in reasonable time. By the end of the first week, her axe swings were finding their mark more often than not. Elias watched this transformation with growing confusion. Every assumption he'd made about Marina Hale was proving wrong, and it unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. She should have broken by now, should have admitted this life was too hard, too isolated, too far from everything she'd known. But instead, she seemed to bloom in the work, finding satisfaction in each completed task, each new skill mastered. Why? He asked one evening as they sat on the cabin steps, both too tired to move after a long day of hauling hay into the barn. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Why what? Marina didn't look at him, her eyes on the horizon. Why are you trying so hard? You could take it easier. Let me handle the heavy work. I wouldn't think less of you for it. Marina was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. After my family died, I spent 3 years in Philadelphia doing piecework sewing, 14 hours a day in a cramped room, making dresses for women who wouldn't give me a second glance on the street. I had a bed in a boarding house, shared it with 2 other girls in shifts. We slept in 8-hour rotations because the landlady charged by the bed, not by the person. Elias felt something twist in his chest. He'd known she'd worked as a seamstress, but he'd pictured something genteel, comfortable. I made enough to survive, Marina continued, just barely. And every single day I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming invisible, just hands that could sew, nothing more. She finally turned to look at him, and in the fading light, her eyes were fierce. When I saw your advertisement, I didn't answer because I was desperate. I answered because I saw a chance to matter again, to build something that would last, to be more than just existing. You could matter anywhere, Elias said, the words coming from someplace he didn't recognize. You didn't have to come all the way out here. Yes, I did. Marina stood, brushing off her skirt. Because anywhere else, people would see this face and make assumptions about what I could or couldn't do, about what I wanted or needed. But out here? She gestured to the ranch, the land stretching vast and darkening around them. Out here, the work speaks for itself. Either I can do it or I can't. Either I pull my weight or I don't. No one cares what I look like when there's fence to mend and cattle to feed. I cared, Elias said quietly. That first day, I took one look at you and decided you'd leave. I know. Marina's voice wasn't accusatory, just factual. You're still waiting for me to leave, Mr. Hart. I can feel it in the way you watch me, like you're expecting me to break any moment. She was right. He was waiting for the moment when she'd finally admit defeat, pack her trunks, and ask him to take her back to town. But that moment kept not coming, and with each passing day, Elias felt something shift inside him. A dangerous softening, a crack in the walls he'd built so carefully. The second week brought their first real test. Elias had mentioned needing to ride out to check the far pasture, a 2-hour journey to the northern edge of his property, where he ran a smaller herd during the warmer months. Marina had immediately volunteered to come. You can ride? Elias had asked, skeptical. My uncle taught me. I'm not expert, but I can stay in a saddle. She could do more than stay in a saddle, Elias discovered. Marina sat her horse, a gentle mare named Clover, with the ease of someone who'd spent considerable time riding. As they rode north through country that grew rockier and more rugged, she kept pace without complaint, even when the trail narrowed and they had to navigate steep inclines. Your uncle's farm must have been substantial, Elias commented as they paused to let the horses drink from a creek. 300 acres. He raised dairy cattle mostly, some chickens, kept a large garden. Marina's expression grew distant. I loved it there. Spent every summer from age 7 to 16 helping him and my aunt. I think that's why the city felt so suffocating after everything. I kept remembering what it felt like to have space around me, room to breathe. Why didn't you go back there, to your uncle's farm? Marina's hands tightened on her reins. He died. My aunt sold the farm and moved to Boston to live with her daughter. By the time I thought to ask if I could work there, it belonged to someone else. I'm sorry. Life happens, Mr. Hart. People die. Things change. You adapt or you drown. She urged her horse forward. I chose to adapt. They found the northern herd scattered across a high meadow, the cattle fat and content after a season of good grazing. Elias and Marina spent an hour checking each animal, and it was Marina who spotted the problem, a young cow limping badly, favoring her right front leg. There, she said, pointing. That one. She's in pain. Elias had already seen her, but he was impressed Marina had noticed so quickly. They cut the cow from the herd, and Elias examined the leg carefully, finding a nasty abscess on the hoof that would need draining and treatment. I'll need to get her back to the home barn, he said, frustrated. The process would take hours, cutting into daylight they didn't have to spare. You should ride back, I'll handle this. Or, Marina said, I ride back, get the medical supplies you need, and bring them here. You can treat her in this meadow, and we both ride home before dark. Elias looked at her. That's a 2-hour round trip, alone. I'm aware. I can follow a trail, Mr. Hart, and your ranch isn't so large I'll get lost. Marina was already turning Clover. What supplies do you need? He told her, knife, clean cloths, the bottle of carbolic acid from the barn, bandaging materials. Marina repeated the list back perfectly, then set off at a steady trot before Elias could second-guess the decision. Watching her ride away, straight-backed and confident, Elias felt that crack in his walls widen further. She'd ridden out here without complaint. She'd spotted the injured cow, and now she was riding back alone, across rough country, trusted with an important task. Every day she found new ways to prove she wasn't what he'd expected, and every day that terrified him a little more. Marina returned in just over 2 hours, the supplies carefully packed in saddlebags. Together they treated the cow's hoof, messy, unpleasant work that had Marina grimacing but never backing away. By the time they finished, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the meadow in shades of gold. We need to move, Elias said, already mounting. We'll be riding in the dark as it is. They pushed the horses harder on the return journey, racing the sunset. Darkness fell when they were still 30 minutes from the cabin, and Elias felt his anxiety spike. The trail was treacherous enough in daylight. In the dark, with only a sliver of moon to see by. One wrong step could mean a broken leg for horse or rider. "Stay close," he called to Marina, who rode just behind him. "Let your horse pick her way. She can see better than you can." "I'm fine," Marina called back, but he could hear the tension in her voice. They were picking their way down a particularly rocky stretch when Clover stumbled. Marina made a small sound, not quite a cry, and Elias immediately reined in his own horse, turning back. "You hurt?" "No." Marina had kept her seat, one hand pressed to her chest as she caught her breath. "Just startled. Clover's fine too, see?" She patted the mare's neck. "We're both fine." But Elias could hear the shake in her voice, could see, even in the poor light, how rigid her posture had become. She was scared. Of course she was scared. But she wasn't panicking, wasn't demanding they stop or go back. "We'll take it slower," he said. "Another 20 minutes and we'll be on flat ground." "I can manage, Mr. Hart." "I know you can. But we'll take it slower anyway." They did, and eventually the trail leveled out and the cabin lights appeared in the distance like a promise. When they finally reached the barn and dismounted, Elias saw Marina's hands shaking as she untacked Clover. "Go inside," he said quietly. "I'll finish here." "We finish together." Marina's voice was firm despite the tremor in her hands. "That's the agreement. I do my share." So they worked together in the quiet barn, tending to horses tired from the long day, and Elias found himself watching Marina covertly, the way she murmured soft words to Clover, the way she checked each buckle twice to make sure it was properly secured, the way she moved with careful precision despite her obvious exhaustion. "You were scared," he said as they walked to the cabin. "On that rocky part. You don't have to pretend you weren't." "Of course I was scared." Marina stopped at the cabin door, turning to face him. "I'd be a fool not to be, but being scared doesn't mean I can't do something, Mr. Hart. If I'd let fear stop me, I'd never have left Philadelphia." "What were you afraid of there?" The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Marina's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her features before she controlled it. "Disappearing," she said finally. "Becoming so small and invisible that one day I'd wake up and not remember who I was anymore. That scared me more than dark trails or stumbling horses or anything this ranch could throw at me." She went inside before Elias could respond, leaving him standing in the cold darkness, her words echoing in his mind. He understood that fear, God did he understand it. Wasn't that why he'd stayed out here alone for so long? Because at least in the isolation he knew who he was. At least the silence didn't ask him to be anything other than what he could manage. But Marina had chosen differently. She'd chosen to fight against disappearing, even if it meant coming to the edge of nowhere with a stranger who'd expected her to fail. Inside, Elias found Marina already heating water for washing, moving around his kitchen with growing familiarity. Over the past 2 weeks, small changes had appeared. A jar of wildflowers on the table, curtains she'd sewn from spare fabric, his dishes now arranged more efficiently. The cabin felt different with her in it, warmer somehow, despite the autumn chill seeping through the walls. "I'll make dinner," she said without looking at him. "You must be as tired as I am." "We'll make it together," Elias heard himself say. "Faster that way." They worked side by side in the small kitchen, Marina following Elias's terse instructions for a simple stew. She chopped vegetables while he prepared the meat, their movements developing an unconscious rhythm. He'd reach for the pot just as she finished with the knife. She'd step back just as he needed to reach the stove. "You've gotten better at cooking," Elias commented, watching her work. "That first attempt at biscuits was terrible," Marina finished, a smile tugging at her lips. "They could have been used as ammunition, but I'm learning. That's what matters." "Why didn't you learn before in Philadelphia?" "No kitchen in the boarding house. We ate at a communal hall, watery soup and hard bread mostly. On good days there'd be a bit of meat." She added the vegetables to the pot with practiced efficiency now. "I used to think about food constantly. Real food, the kind my mother used to make. Roasted chicken and fresh bread and vegetables that still had flavor. Strange what you miss most, isn't it? Not the big things, but the small comforts." Elias thought about his own years of loneliness, the things he'd missed from his old life before Montana. "Not strange at all," he said quietly. They ate dinner together at the small table, another new routine they'd fallen into. At first, Elias had found these shared meals uncomfortable, too intimate somehow. But gradually, he'd come to look forward to them. Marina had a way of filling silence that wasn't invasive. Sometimes she'd talk about her day's observations. Sometimes she'd ask questions about the ranch, and sometimes they'd eat in comfortable quiet, the only sounds, the clink of forks, and the crackle of the fire. "Can I ask you something?" Marina said as she cleared their plates. Elias tensed automatically. I suppose. Why ranching? Why come all the way out here to do this particular work? It was a fair question, one he'd expected earlier. My father was a rancher, he said after a moment, back in Texas. I learned the work young. But Texas to Montana is a significant move. My father died when I was 20. My mother remarried within 6 months, a man who made it clear there wasn't room for me on the ranch anymore. The old bitterness crept into his voice despite his efforts. So I left. Worked my way north, hiring on with different outfits, learning the country. When I found this valley 8 years ago, it was empty, unclaimed. I filed for it and started building. By yourself? Didn't have much choice. Marina was quiet, drying the dishes with slow, thoughtful movements. That must have been incredibly difficult. And lonely. I'm used to lonely. That's not the same as liking it, though, is it? The question struck too close to truths Elias didn't want to examine. He stood abruptly. I should check on Tempest and the foal before bed. You don't need to come. But Marina was already reaching for her shawl. I'd like to. I haven't seen them since that first night. The barn was warm compared to the outside air, heated by the animals' bodies and the fresh hay Elias had laid down that morning. Tempest and her foal occupied the large stall, and both looked healthy, the foal already growing strong on its mother's milk. She's beautiful, Marina whispered, watching the foal nurse. Have you named her yet? Haven't had time to think about it. What about Hope? Marina glanced at him. Since she came so close to not making it? Elias considered the name, the weight of it. Hope, he repeated. That works. They stood together in the quiet barn, watching the mare and foal, and Elias felt something shift again, that dangerous warmth, that growing comfort in Marina's presence. This was exactly what he'd feared, this slow adjustment to not being alone. Because when she left, and she would leave eventually, she had to, the silence would be so much worse for having been broken. Mr. Hart, Marina said softly, what happens at the end of the month? When our agreement is up? Elias's throat tightened. They'd been carefully not discussing this, the approaching deadline, the decision that would need to be made. 3 weeks had passed. 1 week remained. I suppose that depends, he said carefully. On what? On whether you still want to stay. Marina turned to face him fully, and in the dim lamplight her expression was serious. I've worked hard these 3 weeks. I've proven I can handle the work. So why do you still sound like you're expecting me to leave? Because wanting to stay and being able to stay aren't the same thing. Elias forced himself to meet her eyes. Winter's coming, Marina. Real winter. The kind where you don't leave the property for weeks at a time. Where the cold gets so deep it makes your bones ache. Where the isolation... He stopped, searching for words. 3 weeks is nothing compared to 3 months of winter alone out here. Alone? Marina's eyebrows rose. I thought the whole point of this arrangement was that neither of us would be alone anymore. You know what I mean. Do I? Because it sounds like you're still looking for reasons to send me away, Mr. Hart, despite evidence that I can handle this life. Her voice held frustration now, the first real anger he'd heard from her. What will it take? What do I have to do to convince you I'm not going to break or run or whatever it is you're expecting? I don't know. The words burst out louder than intended, and Elias saw Marina flinch. He forced his voice lower. I don't know what it would take, because every time I think you've hit your limit, you surprise me. Every time I expect you to quit, you push harder, and I don't... He stopped, the words jamming in his throat. You don't what? I don't know what to do with that, Elias admitted, the confession rough. I don't know how to... He gestured helplessly between them. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. It was supposed to be practical. A partnership. But you're not... I'm not what you wanted, Marina finished, her voice quiet now. You've made that clear from the beginning. No. Elias took a step closer, frustrated that she didn't understand. You're not what I expected. That's different. I wanted someone who'd be content with just existing here, working, surviving. But you want more than that. I can see it in the way you look at the sunrise, the way you talk about building something lasting. You want this place to mean something. And that's bad? It's terrifying, Elias said honestly. Because what if you decide it doesn't mean enough? What if you wake up one morning and realize you want things I can't give you? What if I stay, Elias? Marina interrupted, and the use of his first name startled them both. She'd never used it before. What if I stay and we build something good here? What if this works? That possibility scares you more than me leaving, doesn't it? The truth of it hit Elias like a physical blow. She was right. The possibility of her staying, of this working, of him opening up his carefully guarded life to let her in, that terrified him more than solitude ever had, because he'd survived being alone. He wasn't sure he'd survive having someone and then losing them. I watched my father break after my mother died, Elias said, the words coming from a place he rarely touched. He loved her so much that when she was gone, there was nothing left of him. Just a shell going through motions until he couldn't even do that anymore. I swore I'd never. He swallowed hard. I'd never let myself care that much. Never let someone matter that much. Marina's expression softened. So you've been alone all these years because you were afraid of what love could cost you? I've been alone because it's safer. Safer isn't the same as better, Elias. Marina reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his where it gripped the stall door. Her hand was warm despite the cold air, and Elias felt his breath catch at the contact. I lost everyone I loved too. My whole family, gone in the span of 2 years. And yes, it broke me. I spent months barely functioning, just existing. But you know what I learned? What? That the love I had for them, the years we had together, that was worth the pain of losing them. That loving them and being loved by them made me who I am. And I won't apologize for wanting that again, for wanting to build something with someone, to matter to someone, to create a life that's more than just survival. Her fingers squeezed his gently. I came here hoping to find that. And I think maybe you placed that advertisement because you were hoping for it too, even if you're too scared to admit it. Elias wanted to deny it, wanted to pull his hand away and retreat back into the safe coldness of isolation. But Marina's touch anchored him, and her words had struck something true. He had wanted more. Somewhere beneath the careful wording about practicality and partnership, beneath all his warnings about hardship and isolation, he'd been hoping for exactly what Marina was offering, a chance to matter to someone, to build something that meant more than just survival. One more week, he said finally, his voice hoarse. One more week, and then we decide. Together. Marina smiled, and it transformed her face in ways that had nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with genuine warmth. Together, she agreed. That's all I've been asking for, Elias. To be in this together. They walked back to the cabin through cold air that bit at exposed skin, and when they reached the door, Elias paused. Thank you, he said, for today, for riding out with me, for handling everything without complaint. We're partners, Marina said simply. That's what partners do. Partners. The word should have felt clinical, practical, exactly what Elias had originally wanted. But the way Marina said it, with warmth and certainty, and something that felt dangerously close to affection, made it mean something more. That night, lying on his bedroll in the dark front room, Elias listened to the quiet sounds of Marina settling for sleep beyond the wall, and allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to keep this. To have someone to share meals with, to work beside, to talk with in the evenings. To have Marina here not just for a month, but for always. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like something he hadn't experienced in years, something that might have been hope. The final week of their agreement began with a morning that felt different somehow, charged with an awareness that time was running out. Elias woke to find frost coating the windows in intricate patterns, the first real kiss of winter arriving earlier than expected. He dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, adding an extra layer against the cold, and emerged from his room to find Marina already at the stove, coaxing the fire to life. It's cold, she said without turning, as if she'd sensed his presence. Really cold. The water in the wash basin had ice on it. First hard freeze. Elias moved to the window, studying the gray sky with growing unease. Storm coming. I can feel it. How soon? Day. Maybe 2. He turned to find her watching him, her expression serious. We'll need to prepare. Get the cattle closer to the barn. Bring in extra firewood. Make sure everything's secured. Then we should start now. Marina poured coffee for them both, her movements efficient in the small kitchen. What do you need me to do? They spent the morning in purposeful preparation, both of them sensing the weight of the approaching weather. Elias had lived through enough Montana winters to recognize the signs, the particular quality of light in the sky, the way the wind shifted direction, the behavior of the animals who grew restless and clustered together instinctively. This storm would be significant, possibly the first real blizzard of the season. Marina worked beside him without needing constant direction, having learned enough over the past weeks to anticipate what needed doing. Together, they reinforced the barn doors, stacked hay where the cattle could reach it easily, and hauled load after load of firewood from the woodpile to stack on the cabin's covered porch. The work was hard, relentless, and by midday both of them were breathing hard despite the cold. "We need to check the far pasture," Elias said as they paused for a brief meal of cold bread and cheese. "Make sure all the cattle are accounted for. Bring any stragglers closer to the home barn. I'll saddle the horses." Marina was already standing, reaching for her coat. "Marina." Elias caught her arm gently. "This could get dangerous. If the storm comes in faster than I think, then we'd better hurry." She met his eyes steadily. "You can't do this alone, Elias. You need help, and I'm here. That's what I came for." They rode out under a sky that had turned the color of old iron, the clouds pressing down with almost physical weight. The temperature had dropped further, and Elias could taste snow in the air, that particular metallic sharpness that always preceded a heavy storm. The cattle in the near pasture had already begun clustering, their instincts telling them to seek shelter and safety in numbers. The ride to the far pasture took nearly an hour, both of them pushing the horses harder than usual. They found most of the northern herd already moving south on their own, driven by the same instincts that had clustered the nearer cattle. But 3 cows had separated from the group, 2 with young calves that couldn't travel as fast as the rest. "There," Marina pointed to where the small group had taken shelter in a grove of pines. "They're trying to wait out the storm where they are. They'll freeze if they stay there." Elias dismounted, studying the situation. The cows were nervous, protective of their calves, and getting them to move would require careful handling. "We need to herd them south, keep them moving with the others." What followed was tense, difficult work. The cows didn't want to leave their shelter, and the calves were already exhausted from the cold. Marina proved her worth again, positioning herself to block retreat while Elias urged the small group forward, both of them working in coordination that had developed over their weeks together. Slowly, painfully, they got the reluctant cattle moving. They'd been working for perhaps 20 minutes when Elias felt the first snowflake touch his face, then another. Then suddenly the air was thick with them, fat flakes falling fast and heavy, reducing visibility within moments. "Elias!" Marina's voice came from somewhere to his left, already muffled by the snow. "It's coming fast. Keep the cattle moving." He could barely see her now, just a dark shape in the whiteness. "Follow them south. They know the way." The storm descended with frightening speed, transforming from light snow to blinding whiteout in what felt like minutes. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally, stinging exposed skin and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Elias kept his horse moving, trusting the animal's instincts more than his own diminishing visibility, focused on keeping the cattle moving in roughly the right direction. "Marina!" he called out periodically, needing to hear her voice, needing to know she was still there. Each time she answered, and each time he felt a relief so intense it bordered on pain. Time became elastic, meaningless. They could have been riding for 20 minutes or 2 hours. Elias had no way to tell. The cold bit deep now, making his hands clumsy even inside his gloves, making his face numb. He thought of Marina out here in this, and fear clenched his gut tighter than the cold ever could. Finally, impossibly, he saw the dark shape of the barn emerging from the snow. They'd made it. The cattle had led them home, and the small group they'd rescued was already moving toward the shelter of the other animals. Elias slid from his horse, his legs nearly buckling, and immediately looked around for Marina. "Marina!" His voice was raw from shouting over the wind. "Marina, where are you?" "Here!" She materialized from the snow like a ghost, leading Clover toward the barn. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue, frost coating her eyelashes, and the scarf wrapped around her lower face. But she was here. She was safe. "Inside," Elias ordered, his voice harsh with relief and lingering fear. "Get inside now. I'll handle the horses." "We'll handle them together." Marina's voice was steady despite the chattering of her teeth. 10 more minutes won't... Inside. Elias grabbed her shoulders, seeing how badly she was shaking now that they'd stopped moving. "Marina, please, you're half frozen. Let me do this." Something in his voice must have convinced her. She nodded once and stumbled toward the cabin, and Elias forced himself to turn away, to focus on getting both horses into the barn, removing their tack with numb fingers, rubbing them down despite his own exhaustion. The cattle were all accounted for, pressed together in the barn and the covered areas around it. They'd made it. Everyone had made it. But when Elias finally made it to the cabin, slamming the door against the howling wind, he found Marina sitting as close to the stove as possible, still wrapped in her coat, shaking so hard she couldn't hold the cup of coffee she'd tried to pour. Jesus. Elias was beside her in 2 strides, pulling off his own wet coat and then reaching for hers. How long have you been this cold? I'm fine, Marina stammered, but her hands were like ice when he took them in his, and her skin had that dangerous waxy quality that spoke of serious exposure. You're not fine. You're hypothermic. Elias's mind raced through what needed to be done. We need to get you warm. Dry clothes first, then warm liquids, then... I can manage. But Marina couldn't even stand without swaying, and Elias caught her automatically. Stop being stubborn. His voice came out rougher than intended, fear manifesting as anger. You rode out in that storm for my cattle. The least you can do is let me help you now. He half carried her to the bedroom, sat her on the edge of the bed, and began unlacing her boots with fingers that barely cooperated. Her feet were ice cold through wet stockings, and Elias cursed under his breath as he stripped them off, chafing her feet between his hands to restore circulation. There are dry clothes in my trunk, Marina managed through chattering teeth. The blue dress? I'll get it. Elias found the trunk, pulled out the dress and fresh stockings, then retreated to give her privacy. Can you manage changing, or do you need... I can manage. But he heard the struggle in her voice, heard fabric rustling and small sounds of distress. Marina, I'm coming in. Elias didn't wait for permission, pushing the door open to find her tangled in her wet dress, her arms trapped above her head, shaking too hard to coordinate her movements. Here, let me. He should have felt awkward helping her undress, but there was nothing remotely sensual about the moment, only urgency and fear and the desperate need to get her warm. Elias worked the wet dress free, averting his eyes as much as possible, and helped her into the dry one, his hands steadier than hers as he fastened buttons and ties. Sorry, Marina whispered. I should have said something. When I started getting too cold, but we needed to get the cattle, and I thought I could... Don't. Elias wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then another. Don't apologize for being brave and foolish, and... He stopped, swallowing hard. God, Marina, when I couldn't see you in that storm, when I couldn't hear your voice, I thought... I'm here. Her hand found his where it gripped the blanket, her fingers still icy but steadier now. I'm here, Elias. We both made it. He helped her back to the main room, settling her in the chair closest to the stove, and then set about making her hot coffee with honey, forcing her to drink it slowly despite her protests that she was fine. The storm continued to rage outside, wind screaming around the cabin, snow piling against the walls in drifts that would be waist-high by morning. We're snowed in, Elias said, peering out the window at the wall of white. Could be days before this breaks. Do we have enough supplies? Marina's voice was stronger now, the hot liquid and warmth beginning to restore her. Plenty. We prepared well. He moved to the other chair, finally allowing himself to relax slightly now that the immediate crisis had passed. We'll be fine. Uncomfortable maybe, but fine. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm, both processing how close they'd come to disaster. Elias's mind kept replaying those moments in the whiteout when he couldn't see Marina, when each shout into the wind felt like it might be the last time he'd hear her voice. The fear he'd felt had been visceral, overwhelming, nothing like the careful distance he'd tried to maintain. Elias? Marina's voice broke the silence. Earlier, when you said you thought, what did you think? When you couldn't see me? He didn't want to answer, didn't want to expose the depth of what he'd felt in those moments. But after what they'd just been through, lying seemed pointless. I thought I'd lost you, he admitted quietly, and I realized that somewhere in the past month you'd become important. More important than I meant to let anyone be. Marina set down her cup carefully. Is that so terrible? Having someone be important to you? It is when they're going to leave. The words came out flat, automatic. I'm not leaving, Elias. Marina stood, moving closer despite the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. I've proven I can handle the work. I've shown you I'm not fragile or afraid or any of the things you were worried about. So what's it going to take? What do you need to believe I'm staying? I don't know. Elias stood too, agitation driving him to pace. Because it's not about the work, Marina. You've proven that 10 times over. It's about... He stopped, struggling to articulate something he barely understood himself. It's about you not believing you deserve this, Marina said quietly. Not believing you deserve to have someone stay, to have someone care about you, to build a life with someone. The accuracy of it struck him like a physical blow. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Marina moved closer, and despite everything they'd just been through, despite her exhaustion, her gaze was sharp, clear, cutting through his defenses. You've spent 8 years alone out here convincing yourself it's what you want, but that advertisement you placed, that wasn't looking for a farmhand, Elias. That was loneliness crying out for connection, even if you were too scared to admit it. I'm not scared. The denial was automatic, defensive. You're terrified. Marina reached out, placing her hand over his heart, and Elias felt his breath catch. You're terrified that if you let yourself care about me, if you let me matter, I'll leave and take a piece of you with me, just like your mother left your father, just like everyone you've ever loved has left. Stop. The word came out rough, almost desperate. Why? Because it's true? Because facing it means you have to make a choice? Marina's hand pressed firmer against his chest, and Elias knew she could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm. I'm not going anywhere, Elias, but I need you to meet me halfway. I need you to stop waiting for me to leave and start believing I might stay. How? The question burst out, raw and honest. How am I supposed to do that when everything in my life has taught me that caring about someone just means giving them the power to destroy you? By taking a risk. Marina's voice softened. By being as brave about opening your heart as you are about everything else. By trusting that maybe, just maybe, I'm as committed to building this life with you as you are to protecting yourself from being hurt. Elias looked down at her, this woman who'd ridden through a blizzard for his cattle, who'd worked herself to exhaustion proving her worth, who stood here now after nearly freezing and asked him to trust her. The beautiful woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach a month ago had become so much more than her appearance. She'd become capable, strong, funny in unexpected moments, stubborn when it mattered, kind in ways both large and small. She'd become someone he looked forward to seeing each morning, someone whose opinion he valued, someone whose presence had transformed his cabin from a shelter into something that felt dangerously close to a home. She'd become, somewhere along the way, someone he could love. The realization terrified him. I can't lose you, he said, the words barely above a whisper. If I let you in, if I let this be real and then you leave, then you'll survive it. Marina's hand moved from his chest to his face, cupping his jaw with surprising tenderness. The same way you've survived everything else. But Elias, what if I don't leave? What if this works? What if we build something good here, something that lasts? Isn't that possibility worth the risk? He wanted to say no, wanted to step back, rebuild his walls, return to the safety of emotional isolation. But Marina was looking at him with those storm-gray eyes that had seen him at his most defensive, his most scared, his most vulnerable, and she was still here, still asking him to try, still offering him something he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. I'm not good at this, he said finally, at opening up, at letting people in. I don't know how to be what you need. I need you to be honest with me. Marina's thumb brushed across his cheekbone, and Elias felt something in his chest crack wide open. I need you to stop pushing me away because you're afraid. I need you to let me be your partner in truth, not just in name. That's all I've ever asked for. The storm howled outside, shaking the cabin walls, piling snow higher and higher against the windows. Inside, the fire crackled in the stove, casting dancing shadows across the small room. And Elias' heart, who'd spent 8 years building walls around his heart, felt those walls finally crumbling under the steady assault of Marina Hale's unwavering presence. I don't want you to leave, he admitted, the words feeling like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside. I haven't wanted you to leave since about the 3rd day, and that scared me so badly I couldn't even admit it to myself. Because wanting you to stay means risking everything, Marina finished softly. I know. It's the same for me, Elias. Do you think I'm not scared? I left everything I knew to come here. I've thrown myself into this life, this work, this us. If it doesn't work, I have nowhere else to go, nothing to fall back on. So believe me when I say I understand risk. But you're still here. I'm still here, she agreed, because some things are worth the risk. And this, you, me, what we're building together, this is worth it. Elias raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and covered her hand where it rested against his face. Her skin was finally warm again, no longer ice-cold from the storm, and he felt immense relief at that simple fact. 1 month is up tomorrow, he said. Our agreement ends. I know. So what do we do now? Marina smiled, and it transformed her face in ways that had nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with joy. Now you ask me properly. The way you would if you weren't terrified. The way you would if you were willing to admit what this has become. Elias felt his throat tighten. She was right. Their arrangement had stopped being just an agreement weeks ago. had transformed into something real and true and infinitely more meaningful than a simple mail-order marriage. But saying it out loud, making it real with words, felt like stepping off a cliff with no certainty of what lay below. The storm screamed louder, as if emphasizing the moment, and Elias thought about those minutes in the whiteout when he couldn't see Marina, when he'd been certain he'd lost her before he'd ever really had her. He thought about how empty the cabin had felt for 8 years compared to how it felt now with her in it. He thought about the future he'd planned, solitary, safe, emotionally barren, and compared it to the possibility she was offering: partnership, connection, maybe even love. "Marina Hale," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Will you marry me? Not because of an agreement or an arrangement, not for practical reasons or because you need a place to stay, but because I want you here, because I want to build this life with you, because somewhere in the past month you've become the most important person in my world, and the thought of you leaving—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "The thought of you leaving would destroy me. So stay. Please. Marry me and stay." Marina's eyes shone with tears that didn't fall. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll stay. I'll be your partner and your wife and whatever else we build together. Yes, Elias, yes." He pulled her into his arms then, feeling her melt against him, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. She fit there, tucked against his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed to his shirt. They stood like that for a long moment, the storm raging outside while something entirely different raged inside Elias's chest, something that felt dangerously close to happiness. "I was wrong," he murmured into her hair. "That first day, when I saw you step off that stagecoach and thought you were too beautiful, too refined, too good for this life. I was so wrong about everything." "You were wrong about one thing," Marina corrected, pulling back enough to look up at him. "I'm not too good for this life. This life is perfect for me. But you were right about one thing, too." "What's that?" "I am too beautiful for you." She grinned at his expression. "But you're stuck with me now anyway." Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the emotional upheaval, Elias found himself laughing. Actually laughing, the sound rusty and unpracticed, but genuine. "That might be the most conceited and the most wonderful thing anyone's ever said to me. I contain multitudes." Marina's grin softened into something tender. "And I'm looking forward to discovering all of yours too. That's what we have now, Elias. Time. Time to learn each other. Time to build together. Time to make this ranch into a real home." The storm kept them trapped in the cabin for 3 days. 3 days during which they talked more than Elias had talked in the previous 8 years combined. Marina told him about her childhood, about summers on her uncle's farm and winters in Philadelphia, about her parents' love story and the way her whole family had been torn apart by war and illness. She told him about the years of hard work after, about the loneliness of the boarding house, and the soul-crushing monotony of sewing until her fingers bled. In return, Elias found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about his father's grief after his mother's death, about the way his stepfather had made him feel unwelcome in the only home he'd known, about the years of drifting and the profound relief he'd felt when he'd finally found this valley and claimed it as his own. He told her about the loneliness he'd pretended wasn't loneliness, about the way silence had become both comfort and prison. They played cards with a battered deck Elias kept in a drawer. Marina was viciously competitive and crowed with unseemly delight each time she won. They cooked together, Marina's skills improving noticeably each day under Elias's patient instruction. They read aloud from the handful of books Elias owned, taking turns with the pages, Marina's voice bringing the words to life in ways that made even familiar passages seem new. And they planned. Practical plans for the ranch, where to expand the barn, which fields to plant in spring, how to grow the herd. But also deeper plans, the kind that assumed a shared future. Marina wanted to start a proper garden, maybe keep chickens. Elias admitted he'd always wanted to try breeding horses, raising foals like Hope to sell. They talked about improvements to the cabin, about maybe adding another room or two, and the implication of why they might need more space hung unspoken but understood between them. On the third night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Marina reached over and took Elias's hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental, the first time either of them had initiated physical contact outside of work or necessity. Elias laced his fingers through hers, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. "I'm glad the storm trapped us," Marina said softly. "I know that's probably a terrible thing to say, but these past few days, they've been wonderful, getting to just talk, to learn about each other without the work pulling us in different directions. When the storm breaks, we'll need to work twice as hard, Elias warned. Check on all the cattle, clear paths, make sure nothing was damaged. I know, but we'll do it together. Marina squeezed his hand. That's the difference now. Everything we do together. The storm finally broke on the fourth morning, the wind dying to stillness and the snow stopping as abruptly as it had started. Elias woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through windows nearly buried in snow. And for a moment he simply lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of Marina moving around in the other room, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. They dug themselves out slowly, shoveling paths to the barn and checking on the animals. The cattle had weathered the storm well, clustered together for warmth, and hope was bouncing around her stall with the boundless energy of the young. The ranch had survived, and so had they. Not just survived, but emerged stronger somehow, changed by their shared ordeal. We should go into town, Marina said as they stood surveying the snow-covered valley in the afternoon sunshine. Let people know we're all right, and she glanced at him with something shy in her expression. And arrange for the wedding? Unless you want to wait? No, Elias said it firmly, certainly. No waiting. I've wasted enough time already being afraid. We'll go to town tomorrow, arrange it with the minister, and get married as soon as he can manage it. Marina's smile could have lit the entire valley. Tomorrow, then. That night, their last night before making their private commitment public, Elias found himself standing at Marina's bedroom door, knocking softly. She opened it still dressed, her hair loose around her shoulders, and raised an eyebrow questioningly. I just wanted to say... Elias struggled for words, feeling awkward despite everything they'd shared over the past days. Thank you. For not giving up on me. For pushing past my walls and my fear and my stubborn insistence that this couldn't work. For being patient when I was difficult and brave when I was scared. For choosing this life, this place. Me. Marina stepped closer, reaching up to cup his face with both hands. Elias' heart. I didn't choose you despite anything. I chose you because of everything you are. The good and the difficult and the scared. You're a good man who's been hurt and taught himself not to hope. But I think... She stood on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. I think maybe we can learn to hope together. What do you say? Elias turned his head slightly, catching her lips with his in a kiss that was gentle, tentative, full of promise. It was his first kiss in more years than he cared to count, and he was probably terrible at it. But Marina melted into him anyway, her arms sliding around his neck, and for a moment the entire world narrowed to just this, her warmth, her softness, her certainty. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Elias rested his forehead against hers. Together, he agreed. We'll learn together. The trip to town the next day was cold but clear, the horses moving carefully through snow that reached their knees in places. Marina rode beside him, bundled in every warm thing she owned, her cheeks pink with cold and her eyes bright with anticipation. When they reached Bitterroot Station, the same place where they'd met just a month ago, Elias felt the significance of the circle they were completing. News of their survival and impending marriage spread through the small town like wildfire. The minister, a kindly man named Reverend Walsh, agreed to perform the ceremony in 2 weeks, time enough for people to prepare, but not so long that the next storm might trap them all. The general store owner congratulated them heartily, and his wife looked Marina over with the sharp assessment of someone evaluating whether a city woman could really make it on a ranch. He's a good man, Mrs. Patterson said finally, apparently satisfied with whatever she'd seen in Marina's face. Quiet, but solid. You've chosen well, dear. I know, Marina said simply, and the certainty in her voice made Elias's chest tighten with emotion he still didn't quite know how to name. They made their purchases, supplies they'd need, fabric for Marina to make a proper wedding dress, a new shirt for Elias that actually fit correctly, and prepared to head home. But as they were loading the wagon, a familiar figure approached. Old Pete Mackenzie, the stagecoach driver who'd brought Marina to town, tipped his hat to them both. Heard you two are making it official. Can't say I'm surprised. I've been driving that route for 20 years, and I've learned to read people pretty well. When I saw you both that first day, he chuckled. Miss Marina looked at this valley like she was seeing home for the first time. And you, Elias, you looked at her like she was both your greatest hope and your worst fear. That about sums it up, Elias admitted. Well, Pete clapped him on the shoulder. Seems like hope won out. That's good to see. Ranch is no place for a man alone, no matter how tough he thinks he is. Everyone needs someone. As they rode back toward the ranch, the winter sun beginning its early descent toward the mountains, Elias found himself thinking about Pete's words. Everyone needs someone. He'd spent so long denying that truth, convinced that needing someone made him weak, made him vulnerable. But Marina had shown him a different truth, that needing someone and being strong enough to admit it was perhaps the bravest thing a person could do. "What are you thinking about?" Marina asked, breaking into his thoughts. "About how wrong I was," Elias said. "About almost everything. About you, about myself, about what I needed, about what was possible." "Everyone's wrong sometimes." Marina's voice was gentle. "What matters is what we do when we realize it." "And what am I doing?" "You're building a life. With me." "That seems like a pretty good response to being wrong." Elias reached over and took her hand, not caring that it made maneuvering the wagon slightly awkward. "The best response," he corrected. "The only response that matters." The ranch came into view as they crested the final hill, and Elias saw it with new eyes. Not just as his solitary refuge, his place of isolation and safety, but as their home, their future. The place where they would build something lasting, something that mattered, something that would outlive them both. Marina squeezed his hand, and when he looked over, he saw her viewing the scene with the same expression. Not fear or doubt or regret, but anticipation, joy, certainty. "Home," she said softly. "Home," Elias agreed. And for the first time since his mother had died 23 years ago, when Elias Hart said that word, he meant it in every possible sense. Not just a place to sleep or survive, but a place where he belonged, where he was known, where he was, impossibly and wonderfully, loved. The storm had been necessary, he realized as they pulled up to the cabin, not just to trap them together and force honest conversations, but to prove to them both that they could weather anything, literal or metaphorical, as long as they faced it together. Winter would come again and again, hard and unforgiving. There would be struggles and setbacks and moments of doubt, but they would face all of it side by side, partners in truth now, building something neither of them could have built alone. As they unloaded the wagon together, moving in the synchronized rhythm they'd developed over weeks of shared work, Elias allowed himself to feel something he'd forbidden for years. Hope. Raw, terrifying, wonderful hope. And this time, he wasn't afraid of it. The 2 weeks between their decision and the wedding passed in a strange suspension of time, each day feeling both impossibly long and far too short. Marina threw herself into preparing for the ceremony with the same determination she'd brought to learning ranch work, transforming the simple fabric they'd purchased into a dress that took Elias's breath away the first time he glimpsed it hanging in her room. "You're not supposed to see it before the wedding," she'd scolded, catching him staring from the doorway. "It's beautiful," he'd said simply, and the way her face had softened made his chest ache in the best possible way. The ranch work continued despite the preparations because cattle didn't care about weddings and winter preparations couldn't be postponed for sentiment. They worked together each morning, breaking ice on water troughs, distributing hay, checking fence lines that had survived the storm, but would face harder tests in the months ahead. The physical labor grounded them both, kept them connected to the reality of the life they were choosing even as they prepared for the ceremony that would make that choice permanent. Elias found himself watching Marina constantly during those days, noticing things he'd been too guarded to see before. The way she hummed softly while working, old songs her mother had taught her. The way she paused sometimes to watch the mountains, her expression distant and peaceful. The way she'd started rearranging things in the cabin without asking permission, hanging curtains she'd sewn, moving furniture to better catch the light, adding small touches that transformed his sparse shelter into something that felt genuinely lived in. "You're staring again," Marina said one evening as they prepared dinner together, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different everything feels now." Elias stirred the pot on the stove, searching for words to capture the strange newness of everything. This cabin, this ranch, even the work itself. "It's all the same as it was 2 months ago, but it feels completely different." Marina set down her knife, turning to face him fully. "That's because you're not alone in it anymore. Everything changes when you have someone to share it with. The work is easier because there are 2 sets of hands. The evenings are warmer because there's conversation. The future is brighter because you're not facing it by yourself." She moved closer, wiping her hands on her apron. "Does it scare you? How different it feels." "Terrifies me," Elias admitted. "But not in the way it used to. Now I'm scared of losing this, not of having it." "Then we'll have to make sure we don't lose it." Marina reached up to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, the gesture so casual and intimate that it still made Elias's breath catch. "We'll work at it every day, the same way we work at everything else. Together." The word had become something of a touchstone between them, a reminder and a promise. Together. Not alone. Not separate. Together. 3 days before the wedding, a smaller storm rolled through, dropping another foot of snow and postponing several guests who'd planned to travel from distant ranches. Elias and Marina spent the day inside, ostensibly organizing supplies and mending tack, but really just existing in each other's presence in a way that felt increasingly natural. "Tell me about your father," Marina said, as they worked on opposite sides of the small table, her hands busy with needle and thread while Elias repaired a bridle. "You've mentioned him, but never really talked about him." Elias felt his shoulders tense automatically, old defenses rising before he consciously pushed them down. Marina deserved honesty, deserved to know the man she was marrying, all of him including the parts that still hurt. "He was a good rancher," Elias said slowly, keeping his eyes on the leather in his hands. "One of the best. Could read weather, understand cattle, make something grow in soil that should have been barren. He taught me everything I know about this work. But he loved my mother more than anything else in the world. More than the ranch, more than me, more than his own life." The words came harder now, dredging up memories Elias usually kept buried. When she got sick, he fell apart. And when she died, there was just nothing left of him. He went through the motions for a while, but his heart wasn't in it. 6 months after we buried her, he remarried. Not for love, but because the ranch needed a woman's touch, because I needed a mother figure, because everyone told him it was the practical thing to do. "But it wasn't right," Marina said softly. "It was a disaster. My stepmother resented being second choice, resented me for reminding her that she'd never measure up to my mother, resented the ranch for taking so much of my father's attention, even when he was barely functioning. Her son, my stepbrother, took his cues from her. They made it very clear that I was tolerated but not wanted." Elias's hands stilled on the bridle, the memories as vivid as if they'd happened yesterday instead of over a decade ago. "My father did nothing to stop it. I think part of him had died with my mother, and the part that remained just didn't have the energy to fight for me." Marina set down her sewing, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. "So you left." "So I left. Figured if I wasn't wanted, there was no point staying somewhere that had stopped feeling like home." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "I've been running from that ever since, I think. From the fear of caring that much about someone, of needing them so completely that losing them would destroy me the way losing my mother destroyed my father. And now?" Marina's gray eyes held his, steady and unwavering. "Now I'm trying to be braver than he was." Elias took a shaky breath, trying to believe that loving someone is worth the risk of losing them, that building a life together is worth the possibility of pain, that you're worth— He stopped, swallowing hard. "That you're worth everything." Marina stood, moving around the table to wrap her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "You're worth everything too, Elias, and I promise you I'm not going anywhere. Not because of hardship or difficulty or the inevitable challenges we'll face. I'm staying, for all of it." They stood like that for a long moment, and Elias felt something in his chest loosen further, some old knot of fear finally beginning to untangle. He'd spent so long protecting himself, building walls, keeping everyone at a distance. But Marina had somehow found her way past every defense, not by battering them down, but by patiently showing him that the walls weren't keeping him safe. They were keeping him alone. The night before the wedding, tradition demanded they sleep separately, but Elias found himself unable to settle. He lay on his bedroll in the front room, staring at the ceiling and listening to Marina moving around in the bedroom, and felt anxiety he couldn't quite name churning in his gut. "Elias?" Marina's voice came through the door, soft and questioning. "Are you awake?" "Yeah." "Can I come out?" "Of course." She emerged wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders, and settled on the floor beside his bedroll with a soft sigh. "I can't sleep either. Too much thinking. About tomorrow? About everything." Marina pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "About how my life was heading in one direction, lonely, small, disappearing. And then suddenly it turned, and I'm here. About to marry a man I barely know, but somehow feel like I've known forever. About to commit to a life that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure." "Having second thoughts?" Elias tried to keep his voice light, but he heard the edge of fear beneath. "No." Marina turned to look at him, and even in the dim firelight, her expression was clear. "Not second thoughts. Just overwhelmed by how much everything has changed. 3 months ago, I was sewing in that cramped room in Philadelphia, convinced that was all my life would ever be. And now—" She gestured around the cabin to the life they'd built together. "Now I'm here. About to marry you. About to become a rancher's wife in Montana Territory. It's almost too much to believe it's real. Elias pushed himself up on one elbow, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. It's real. You're real. This is real. I know. That's what overwhelms me. It's actually happening. I get to keep this life, this place. You. Marina caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. Promise me something? Anything. Promise me that even when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't retreat back behind those walls. That you'll talk to me, fight with me if necessary, but not shut me out. I can handle difficulty, Elias. I can handle struggle and hardship and all the challenges Montana can throw at us. But I can't handle being shut out of your heart. The vulnerability in her voice, the fear beneath her usual strength, made Elias's throat tighten. I promise, he said roughly. I won't pretend it'll be easy for me. 8 years of habits don't disappear overnight, but I promise I'll try. I'll try to let you in, to keep you close, to share everything instead of carrying it alone. That's all I ask, that you try. Marina shifted closer, resting her head on his shoulder. We're both learning how to do this, how to be partners, how to build a life together. We'll make mistakes, but as long as we make them together, we'll figure it out. They sat like that until the fire burned low, talking softly about everything and nothing, hopes for the future, fears about the challenges ahead, memories of the past month that had already taken on the golden glow of significance. When Marina finally returned to the bedroom, Elias lay back down feeling calmer, more centered, ready for what tomorrow would bring. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Elias woke early, his stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation, and immediately set about his morning routine because the cattle still needed tending regardless of what else the day might hold. He was in the barn checking on Tempest and Hope when he heard horses approaching, several of them. By the time he emerged, 3 wagons had pulled up to the cabin, carrying neighbors he knew by face, if not by name. The Pattersons from town, bringing supplies for a wedding feast. The McCready family from the ranch 10 miles east, with 5 children who immediately began playing in the snow. Even old Pete had come, claiming he wouldn't miss seeing the prettiest bride to ever come through Bitterroot Station get hitched to the stubbornest rancher in the territory. Reverend Walsh is riding out with his wife, Mrs. Patterson informed Elias as she bustled past him carrying what appeared to be an entire roasted ham. They'll be here within the hour. Now, you need to make yourself presentable, young man. Can't marry that lovely girl looking like you've been wrestling cattle. I was checking on the horses, Elias protested weakly, but Mrs. Patterson was already shooing him toward the cabin. Bath, clean clothes, shave that scruff off your face. You've got 45 minutes, so get moving. Elias found himself obeying, caught up in the whirlwind of activity that had overtaken his quiet ranch. He bathed quickly in heated water, shaved carefully, and dressed in the new shirt Marina had insisted he buy, paired with his least worn trousers and his only pair of boots that weren't crusted with mud and manure. When he emerged from his room, transformed from working rancher to something approaching presentable, he found the cabin had been similarly transformed. Someone had hung evergreen branches around the doorways, their piney scent filling the air. The table had been moved to accommodate the food arriving in steady streams. Children darted between adults' legs while the women organized and the men stood around looking vaguely uncomfortable in their own dress clothes. Well now, Pete said, looking Elias up and down with approval. You clean up decent. Miss Marina won't be able to say you didn't make an effort. Where's Marina? Elias asked, suddenly realizing he hadn't seen her since last night. McCready's wagon, Mrs. Patterson said, getting ready with the other ladies. And don't you dare try to see her before the ceremony. It's bad luck. Elias didn't believe in luck, good or bad, but he also wasn't about to argue with Mrs. Patterson when she had that particular look in her eyes. So he waited, making awkward conversation with the assembled guests, accepting congratulations and good-natured teasing about his upcoming nuptials, and trying not to let his nerves show too obviously. Reverend Walsh arrived right on schedule, a kindly man in his 60s with a warm smile and a booming voice. Elias Hart, he said, shaking hands firmly. I've been hearing about you for years, but never managed to get you to church. Took a bride to finally draw you out of isolation, did it? Something like that, Reverend. Well, I'm glad for it. No man should live alone when he doesn't have to. The good book says it's not good for man to be alone, and I found that to be true in my own life. He patted Elias's shoulder. Shall we get started? I understand your bride is ready. Everything that followed had a dreamlike quality, as if Elias was watching it happen to someone else. The guests assembled in and around the cabin, creating a makeshift aisle down the center. The McCready children were lined up and given strict instructions to behave. Reverend Walsh took his position near the fireplace, Bible in hand, and nodded to someone outside. And then Marina appeared in the doorway. Elias's breath stopped. She wore the dress she'd made, simple white fabric transformed by her skilled hands into something elegant. The bodice fitted perfectly, the skirt falling in graceful folds to the floor. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through it. Where had those come from in the middle of winter? And her face was luminous, nervous, and happy, and beautiful in a way that transcended mere physical appearance. But what struck Elias most was her expression as her eyes found his across the crowded cabin. There was no hesitation there, no doubt, no fear, just certainty and something that looked remarkably like joy. Marina walked toward him slowly, steady despite the way her hands trembled slightly. When she reached his side, she smiled up at him, and Elias felt every wall he'd ever built, every defense he'd ever erected, crumble to dust. "Hi," she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "How yourself?" he managed, his voice rough with emotion he'd stopped trying to hide. "You look too beautiful for you?" Marina's eyes danced with gentle teasing, reminding him of that first terrible conversation at the station. "Perfect," Elias corrected. "You look absolutely perfect." Reverend Walsh cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the ceremony about to begin. "Dearly beloved," he started, his voice filling the small cabin, "we are gathered here today to witness the joining of this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Elias in waves, familiar phrases about love and commitment and partnership. He tried to focus, tried to listen properly, but all he could think about was Marina's hand in his, warm and solid and real. This was happening. This was real. After years of isolation and loneliness, after weeks of fear and doubt, after days of growing certainty, this moment had arrived. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Reverend Walsh continued, "but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Elias, Marina, have you come here freely and without reservation to give yourselves to each other in marriage?" "I have," Marina said clearly, her voice steady. "I have," Elias echoed, and heard the truth of it resonate in his chest. "Then let us proceed. Elias Hart, do you take Marina Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only unto her for as long as you both shall live?" Elias looked at Marina, at this woman who'd proven every assumption wrong, who'd fought past his defenses with patience and determination, who'd chosen this hard life and chosen him. "I do," he said, and put every ounce of commitment he possessed into those two small words. "Marina Hale, do you take Elias Hart to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only unto him, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Marina's voice rang clear, and Elias saw tears shining in her eyes, though none fell. "I absolutely do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and by God Almighty, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Walsh beamed at them both. "Elias, you may kiss your bride." For a moment, Elias froze, suddenly aware of the dozen pairs of eyes watching them. But then Marina stood on her toes, her hands coming up to frame his face, and whispered, "Don't think, just feel." So he did. He bent his head and kissed her, gentle and reverent, feeling her smile against his lips and hearing the soft cheer from the assembled guests. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Reverend Walsh was chuckling. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Elias Hart." The cabin erupted in applause and congratulations. People pressed forward to shake Elias's hand and embrace Marina, offering well wishes and advice in equal measure. Mrs. McCready produced a camera and insisted on taking a photograph of the new couple, positioning them stiffly in front of the fireplace before disappearing under the black cloth to take the picture. "Stand still now," she instructed, "and try not to look so terrified, Mr. Hart. You just married a beautiful woman, not signed your death warrant." The resulting laughter relaxed everyone, and when Mrs. McCready finally took the photograph, Elias found he was actually smiling. His arm was around Marina's waist. When had that happened? And she leaned into him naturally, her hand resting on his chest, and for just a moment before the flash, Elias let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. He was married to Marina. This incredible, stubborn, beautiful, capable woman was now his wife, his partner, his family. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Elias had experienced in his years on the ranch. Food appeared from seemingly nowhere. The ham Mrs. Patterson had brought, fresh bread still warm from someone's oven, Vegetables preserved from fall harvests, even a cake that Mrs. Walsh had somehow managed to transport without destroying. Music materialized as Pete produced a harmonica, and one of the McCready boys revealed a surprising talent with a fiddle. "Dance with your bride," Mrs. Patterson ordered, and before Elias could protest that he didn't know how to dance, Marina was pulling him into the cleared space that had become a makeshift dance floor. "I don't really know how," he admitted as she placed his hand on her waist and took his other hand in hers. "Neither do I, not really. My mother tried to teach me once, but I was terrible at it." Marina smiled up at him. "So we'll figure it out together. Seems to be our way, doesn't it?" They swayed more than danced, finding a rhythm that had nothing to do with the music and everything to do with learning to move together. Other couples joined them, the McCreadys, the Pattersons, even Reverend Walsh and his wife, and the small cabin filled with warmth and laughter, and the kind of joy that came from community celebrating two of its own. As the afternoon wore into evening, guests began making preparations to leave, mindful of the cold and the distance they had to travel. The McCreadys departed first, their children exhausted from playing in the snow. The Pattersons lingered to help clean up, Mrs. Patterson pressing leftover food into containers for Elias and Marina to enjoy in the coming days. "You've got a good one there," she said quietly to Elias as Marina said goodbye to the departing guests. "Smart, capable, not afraid of hard work. She'll make a fine rancher's wife." "I know," Elias said, watching Marina laugh at something Pete was saying. "I'm lucky she chose this life." "Oh, I don't think it was luck." Mrs. Patterson patted his arm knowingly. "I think it was two people who needed each other finding their way together. That's not luck, young man. That's meant to be." Finally, blessedly, they were alone. The cabin was quiet again, though transformed by the evidence of celebration. Evergreen boughs still hanging, the lingering scents of food and pine, small gifts left by well-wishers stacked on the table. Elias stood in the center of the room, suddenly uncertain now that the distraction of guests had departed. Marina was still in her wedding dress, but she'd unpinned her hair, and it fell in waves around her shoulders. She looked tired but happy, and when she caught Elias watching her, she smiled with a mixture of shyness and something else, something that made his heart race. "So," she said softly, "we're married." "We're married," Elias agreed, the reality of it settling over him like a physical weight. "Are you happy?" The question was tentative, uncertain in a way Marina rarely was. Elias crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her face in his hands with a gentleness that contradicted his usual roughness. "I'm terrified," he admitted, and overwhelmed, and still half convinced I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream. But happy? He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "Marina, I don't think I've ever been this happy in my entire life. I didn't even know this kind of happiness existed." She made a small sound, relief or joy or both, and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet cabin, and Elias felt something settle deep in his bones. This was his life now. This woman in his arms was his wife. This feeling of completeness, of belonging, of being known and chosen anyway, this was what he'd been missing all those lonely years. "I should probably change," Marina murmured eventually, though she made no move to step away. "This dress is beautiful, but it's not exactly comfortable." "Need help?" The offer came out more hopeful than Elias intended, and Marina laughed against his chest. "Forward of you, Mr. Hart." "We're married now, Mrs. Hart. I think I'm allowed to be forward." Marina pulled back enough to look up at him, and something heated flickered in her eyes. "Mrs. Hart," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that. Sound of—" "So do I." Elias tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, letting his fingers linger on her cheek. "Marina Hart, my wife." "Your wife," she agreed, and stood on her toes to kiss him, deeper this time, more purposeful. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed and her breathing unsteady. "Give me a few minutes to change. Then we can figure out the rest together." She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Elias standing in the middle of the cabin trying to remember how to breathe normally. He busied himself banking the fire, checking that the door was secured against the cold, doing anything to occupy hands that wanted to shake with nerves and anticipation. When Marina emerged, she wore a simple nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and her hair was braided loosely. She looked young and uncertain and heartbreakingly beautiful, and Elias felt his chest tighten with an emotion so intense it bordered on painful. "Hi," she said again, echoing her words from the ceremony. "Hi." Elias held out his hand and Marina crossed the room to take it. "Are you scared?" "A little," she admitted, Not of you, just of all of this. It's real now. We're really married, really committed to building this life together. It's overwhelming. I know. Elias drew her close, tucking her against his chest. But we've handled every other overwhelming thing by taking it one step at a time, one day at a time. So that's what we'll do now, one moment at a time, together. Together, Marina echoed, and the word had become their anchor, their promise, their foundation. They stood like that for a while, simply holding each other, and then Marina tilted her head back to look up at him. "Take me to bed, husband," she said softly, and the words sent heat racing through Elias's veins. "Are you sure?" His voice came out rough, strained with the effort of giving her one last chance to hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything." Marina took his hand and led him toward the bedroom that would now be theirs, not just hers. "I chose this. I chose you. And I want all of it, Elias. All of you." The bedroom door closed behind them, and the rest of the world fell away. There was only the two of them, learning each other in the most intimate way possible, discovering new territories together with the same patience and determination they'd brought to everything else. It was awkward at moments. They were both inexperienced, uncertain, but it was also tender and sweet and transformative in ways neither of them had anticipated. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Marina resting her head on Elias's chest, while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, Elias felt a peace so profound it was almost frightening. "I love you," he said into the darkness, the words coming without conscious decision. "I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between that first day and today, I fell in love with you. I tried not to. I fought it as hard as I could, but Marina, I love you so much it terrifies me." Marina pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with eyes that shone even in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady and certain. "I think I started falling the moment you helped me with Tempest, when you trusted me to do real work instead of treating me like I was fragile. And I kept falling every day after, every time you taught me something new, every time you let me see past your walls, every time you proved that underneath all that gruffness was a good man who'd just been hurt and taught himself not to hope." "I'm hoping now," Elias said, pulling her down for a kiss. "God help me. I'm hoping for everything. Then we'll hope together." Marina settled back against his chest, her arm draped across his waist. "And we'll build together, and we'll love each other through whatever comes. That's what marriage means, isn't it? Facing everything together?" "That's what it means," Elias agreed, and felt the truth of it resonate through his entire being. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who'd started as strangers brought together by desperation and loneliness, transformed into partners by hard work and honest communication, and now joined as husband and wife by choice and love and mutual commitment to building something that would last. Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The ranch slept peacefully, cattle settled in for the night, horses comfortable in the barn, Hope curled beside her mother in their stall. Everything was quiet, still, waiting for whatever the future would bring. And inside the small cabin, Elias' heart slept without nightmares for the first time in years. His wife safe in his arms, his heart finally, impossibly, wonderfully, open to hope. Morning arrived with the kind of gentle stillness that only came after fresh snow. And Elias woke to find pale sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and Marina's weight warm against his side. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't quite reconcile this reality with the 8 years that had preceded it, waking alone, facing each day with nothing but work and silence stretching ahead. Then Marina stirred, murmuring something in her sleep, and the present crashed back over him with stunning clarity. She was his wife. This was his life now. Everything had changed. Elias extracted himself carefully, not wanting to wake her, and dressed quietly before slipping out to handle the morning chores. The cold air hit him like a slap, sharp and bracing, but he welcomed it. The cattle needed tending regardless of what personal transformations had occurred the night before, and there was something grounding about returning to familiar routines, even as everything else shifted beneath his feet. He was halfway through distributing hay when he heard the cabin door open and turned to see Marina emerging, wrapped in her heavy coat, her hair hastily pinned up. She picked her way through the snow toward him, and when she got close enough, she smiled with a mixture of shyness and contentment that made his chest tight. "Good morning, husband," she said, the word still new enough to make them both pause. "Morning, wife." Elias tested the word, found he liked the weight of it. "You didn't need to come out, could have stayed warm inside." "And miss working with you on our first morning as a married couple?" Not a chance. Marina took the pitchfork he offered, moving to help without needing direction. Besides, we're partners, remember? That doesn't stop just because we had a wedding. They worked together in companionable silence, the rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks unchanged by their new legal status. But there were small differences now. The way Marina leaned into him briefly as they passed, the way Elias let his hand linger on her back when he steadied her on an icy patch, the way they both smiled at each other for no particular reason except that they could. When they finished and returned to the cabin for breakfast, Marina paused at the door, turning to survey the snow-covered valley with an expression Elias couldn't quite read. "What are you thinking?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I'm home," Marina said softly. "Really, truly home. Not just passing through, not temporarily settling, but actually home. Do you know how long it's been since I've felt that? Since before the war. Since I was a child in my parents' house." She looked up at him, and her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you for giving me that, for letting me build this with you." "I think we gave it to each other," Elias said, pulling her close. "I was just surviving before you came, existing. But this," he gestured to the ranch, to the life they were building. "This is living. You taught me the difference." The first months of their marriage settled into patterns that felt both entirely new and surprisingly natural. Winter deepened its grip on Montana, bringing storms that buried the ranch under fresh snow every few days, cold so intense it made breath crystallize in the air, darkness that fell early and lifted late. It was the kind of winter that tested everyone who tried to survive it, revealing weaknesses and exposing any cracks in preparation or resolve. But Elias and Marina faced it together, and that made all the difference. They developed routines that played to their strengths. Elias handled the heaviest outdoor work, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling hay to cattle that couldn't forage through deep snow, checking fence lines for damage from wind and weight. Marina managed the indoor work, cooking meals that stretched their supplies through the lean months, mending clothes that took constant abuse from harsh conditions, maintaining the cabin that was their sanctuary against the brutal world outside. But they also worked together whenever possible, because they'd learned that sharing the burden made everything easier. Marina bundled up and trudged through snow to help Elias feed cattle, her presence making the cold morning rounds feel less isolating. Elias came inside early some afternoons to help Marina with tasks that required extra hands, moving furniture to clean beneath it, hanging herbs to dry, organizing their dwindling supplies with an eye toward spring. And in the evenings, after the work was done and they'd eaten dinner together, they talked. Long, rambling conversations about everything and nothing, Marina's memories of her family, Elias's dreams for expanding the ranch, silly arguments about whether coffee or tea was superior, serious discussions about where to plant crops come spring, and how many calves they could expect from the herd. "I was thinking," Marina said one night as they sat by the fire, her feet in Elias's lap while he absently rubbed them warm. "We should try raising chickens. Fresh eggs would be wonderful, and they're not terribly difficult to manage." "We'd need to build a coop," Elias said, considering. "Something sturdy enough to keep out predators. Foxes, coyotes, even hawks. Could we do it before spring? Have everything ready so we can get chicks as soon as the weather breaks?" Elias thought about the work involved, the materials they'd need, the time it would take. A month ago, he would have dismissed it as too much trouble. But looking at Marina's eager expression, thinking about fresh eggs, and the satisfaction of adding another element to their homestead, he found himself nodding. "We could do it," he said. "Start working on it during the warmer days. Have it ready by March, probably." Marina's delighted smile was worth any amount of extra work. But winter wasn't all easy domesticity and shared dreams. There were hard days, too. Days when the cold was so severe that even checking the cattle felt dangerous. When supplies ran lower than comfortable. When the isolation pressed in and made them both irritable. They had their first real argument 6 weeks into their marriage. A stupid fight about nothing important that escalated because they were both exhausted and worried about a cow that had gone missing in a storm. "I'm going out to look for her," Elias insisted, pulling on his heaviest coat despite the late hour and the howling wind outside. "It's nearly dark. You can't see anything in this storm." Marina blocked the door, her face flushed with anger and fear. "Elias, be reasonable. You'll get lost or hurt, or she's one of my best breeding cows. I can't just abandon her." His voice rose to match hers, frustration bleeding through. "This is my ranch, Marina. I know what I'm doing." "Your ranch?" Marina's eyes flashed dangerously. "Since when is it just yours? I thought we were building this together, or was all that talk about partnership just words?" The accusation hit harder than Elias expected, and he felt his own anger spike. That's not fair. You know I didn't mean... Then what did you mean? Because it sounded an awful lot like you making decisions without me, risking yourself without caring how it would affect me if something happened to you. Marina's voice cracked slightly, and Elias realized with shock that she was close to tears. Do you have any idea what it would do to me if you went out there and didn't come back? The fight drained out of Elias as quickly as it had risen. He closed the distance between them, pulling Marina into his arms despite her initial resistance. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You're right. I wasn't thinking about how it would affect you. I was just thinking about the cow, about not losing stock, about doing everything yourself because that's what you've always done, Marina finished, her voice muffled against his chest. But you're not alone anymore, Elias. You have me, and I need you to come back safe more than we need one cow. They stood like that for a long moment, and when Marina finally pulled back, her expression was serious but no longer angry. We'll look together in the morning, when it's light and the storm's past. If she survived the night, we'll find her. If she didn't, she swallowed hard. Then we'll face that loss together too. Together, Elias echoed and felt the truth of it settle deeper. You're right. I'm sorry I forgot that. They found the cow the next morning, sheltering in a grove of pines 300 yards from the barn, cold but alive. As they herded her back, Marina reached over and squeezed Elias's hand. We're going to fight sometimes, she said matter-of-factly. That's what happens when two stubborn people try to build a life together. But as long as we remember we're on the same side, we'll figure it out. When did you get so wise? Elias asked, only half joking. I've always been this wise. You were just too busy being guarded to notice. Despite the challenges, or perhaps because they faced them together, Elias found himself happier than he'd ever imagined possible. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 8 years had evaporated completely, replaced by Marina's presence, her voice filling the cabin with warmth, her laughter breaking up the monotony of endless winter days, her steady competence making every task lighter. And the physical intimacy of marriage, which Elias had approached with more anxiety than he'd admitted, had become one of his favorite aspects of their life together. Learning Marina's body, discovering what made her sigh or laugh or clutch at him desperately, feeling her learn him in return. It was vulnerable and terrifying and absolutely wonderful. Some nights they came together with urgent passion, other nights with gentle tenderness, and occasionally they just held each other, finding comfort in closeness without needing anything more. I never want to take this for granted, Marina whispered one night as they lay tangled together, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. This feeling of being known, of being chosen, of mattering to someone. You matter to me more than anything, Elias said, and felt the truth of it resonate through his entire being. More than this ranch, more than the cattle, more than my own stubborn pride. You matter most. As winter finally began loosening its grip and the first hints of spring appeared, days that stayed light a bit longer, temperatures that occasionally climbed above freezing, the first brave crocuses pushing through melting snow, Elias and Marina began preparing for the growing season with shared excitement. They built the chicken coop together, Elias teaching Marina how to measure and cut wood properly, Marina contributing design ideas that made the structure more functional. When it was finished, they stood back and admired their work with the satisfaction of creation. Our first major project as a married couple, Marina said, threading her arm through his. It's perfect. It's crooked in 3 places and the door doesn't quite hang straight, Elias corrected, but he was smiling. It's perfect, Marina insisted, because we built it together. They ordered chicks through the mercantile in town, along with seeds for Marina's expanded garden, vegetables she remembered from her uncle's farm, herbs she wanted to try growing, even flowers because, as she told Elias firmly, a home needed beauty as well as function. Flowers, Elias had repeated skeptically. In Montana. Flowers, Marina confirmed. Wildflowers grow here naturally, so there's no reason cultivated ones won't. And I want color, Elias. I want something pretty to look at after the winter we've had. She got her flowers. And when they bloomed that summer, bright splashes of color against the rough cabin walls, Elias had to admit they made the homestead look more like a home and less like just a working ranch. Spring brought other changes, too. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and Tempest's second foal arrived without complications, another strong filly that Marina immediately named Grace. The herd expanded with the season's calving, and Elias began making plans to purchase additional breeding stock now that he had help managing a larger operation. We could probably handle 30, maybe 40 head total, he mused one evening as they discussed the ranch's future. With both of us working, with the improvements we've made, we could expand sustainably. And horses? Marina asked. You mentioned wanting to try breeding horses. Would take a few years to establish properly. Need to acquire good breeding stock, build appropriate facilities, develop a reputation. Elias paused, looking at his wife. But yes, I'd like to try. If you're willing to commit to that kind of long-term project. Marina reached across the table, taking his hand. Elias, I'm committed to spending my entire life here with you. A few years establishing a horse breeding operation sounds perfect. The certainty in her voice still amazed him sometimes. She'd proven herself over and over throughout the winter, never complaining about the hardships, never expressing regret about her choice, facing every challenge with determination and good humor. But some small part of Elias still waited for the moment when she'd realize she'd made a mistake, when the reality of this hard life would finally overwhelm her romantic notions about building something lasting. That moment never came. Instead, Marina bloomed in ways Elias hadn't anticipated. The city woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 9 months ago had been replaced entirely by someone confident and capable, someone who could gentle a nervous horse or wrestle a stubborn fence post with equal competence. Her hands, once smooth and unmarked, now bore calluses and small scars from honest work. Her face, always beautiful, had been touched by sun and wind until she glowed with health and vitality that transcended mere physical attractiveness. She was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that showed in every smile, every laugh, every moment of contentment as she surveyed the life they were building together. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long days of hard work. Planting crops, tending the garden that Marina had expanded ambitiously, managing the growing herd, making improvements to the ranch infrastructure. They worked from dawn until well past dusk most days, both too exhausted by nightfall to do more than eat a quick meal and collapse into bed. But even exhausted and filthy from a day's work, they found moments of connection. Marina would catch Elias's eye across the pasture and smile in a way that made his heart skip. Elias would come up behind Marina in the garden and wrap his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her neck before returning to his tasks. Small touches, brief moments, but they added up to something profound, a sense of partnership that went beyond the practical into something that felt almost sacred. I want to show you something, Marina said one evening in late July, taking Elias's hand and leading him away from the cabin toward the rise that overlooked the valley. What is it? Elias asked, following her up the slope. Just trust me. They reached the crest as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and deep purple. The ranch spread below them, the cabin with its new flower gardens, the expanded barn and new chicken coop, the cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures, the fields that were green with growing crops. Everything they'd built, everything they were building, laid out like a promise made visible. Look at it, Marina said softly, her hand tight in his. Look at what we've created in less than a year. When I first arrived, this was a working ranch, functional but bare. Now, it's a home. Our home. With flowers and chickens and plans for the future, with love in every corner and hope in every improvement. You did that, Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. You transformed this place. We did that, Marina corrected, turning to face him. Together. And Elias, I have something to tell you, something wonderful. Something in her expression made Elias's breath catch. What? I'm pregnant. The words came out soft but clear, and Marina's face glowed with joy and nervousness in equal measure. I've suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I said anything. We're going to have a baby, probably sometime in February, if my calculations are right. For a moment, Elias couldn't process the information. A baby. Their baby. A child who would be born into this life they were building, who would grow up knowing this valley and this ranch, who would be taught by both of them how to work the land and love the place that had brought their parents together. Elias? Marina's voice held a note of uncertainty. Say something. Are you happy? I know we hadn't discussed children specifically, but I thought... He pulled her into his arms so suddenly that she gasped, holding her tight enough that she squeaked in protest. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, he said roughly, his face buried in her hair, terrified, overwhelmed, amazed, grateful, but happy most of all. Marina. A baby. Our baby. Our baby, Marina echoed, and when Elias pulled back enough to see her face, she was crying and laughing at the same time. A little person who'll be part both of us, who'll have your strength and maybe my stubbornness, who'll grow up here with space and fresh air and parents who love each other. Elias, we're going to be a family. We already are a family, Elias said, but he understood what she meant. This baby would be the physical manifestation of everything they'd built together, proof that their partnership extended beyond just themselves into something that would outlast them both. That night, lying in bed with his hand resting on Marina's still flat stomach, Elias felt the last remnants of his old fears finally, completely dissolve. He'd been so afraid of caring too much, of needing someone so completely that losing them would destroy him. But Marina had taught him that the risk was worth it, that love wasn't something to be feared, but something to be embraced with both hands and full heart. "Are you scared?" Marina asked quietly in the darkness. "About becoming a father?" "Terrified," Elias admitted. "I don't know the first thing about babies or raising children. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I make all the same mistakes my father made? Then we'll make them together and learn from them together." Marina turned to face him, her hand covering his where it rested on her stomach. "I'm scared too, Elias. Scared of childbirth, scared of being a mother, scared of all the ways we might fail this little person. But we'll figure it out the same way we've figured out everything else. One day at a time, one challenge at a time. Together." "Together," Elias repeated, and pulled her close. The pregnancy progressed through the late summer and into fall, and Elias found himself viewing everything through the lens of impending parenthood. The cabin needed another room. They began planning an addition to be built before winter. The ranch needed to be more profitable to support a growing family. He negotiated better prices for his cattle and began seriously researching horse breeding. Everything had new urgency, new meaning, because it wasn't just about him and Marina anymore. It was about the life they were creating, the future they were building, not just for themselves, but for their child. Marina handled the pregnancy with the same matter-of-fact competence she brought to everything else, never complaining even when the work became more difficult, adjusting to the changes in her body with grace. As her belly grew round with their child, Elias found himself overwhelmed regularly by the reality of what they'd created. Not just a baby, but a life together. A partnership that had transcended all his expectations and fears. "I keep thinking about that first day," Marina said one evening in October, almost a year to the day since she'd arrived. They sat on the cabin steps, watching the sunset, Marina's head resting on Elias's shoulder, his arm around her expanded waist. "You looked at me like I was your worst nightmare come to life." "I looked at you like you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and I was terrified of what that meant," Elias corrected. "I was right to be terrified, just not for the reasons I thought." "What do you mean?" "I thought you'd break me by leaving, but you broke me by staying, broke apart all the walls I'd built, all the defenses I'd erected, all the careful distance I'd maintained from feeling too much. You broke me open, Marina, and then you put me back together into something better. Someone who can love without fear. Someone who can hope without reservation. Someone who can be a husband and is about to become a father." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "So yes, you were my worst nightmare, because you forced me to change everything about how I approached life, but you were also my greatest blessing." "That might be the most beautiful thing you've ever said to me," Marina whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm a rancher, not a poet. Don't expect speeches. I don't need speeches. I just need you, exactly as you are." Winter returned, and this time Elias faced it with anticipation rather than dread because Marina's due date approached. They'd prepared as much as possible. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to come stay with them when Marina's time came, bringing her experience from delivering her own 5 children. The cabin addition was finished, giving them more space. Supplies were stocked, plans were made. Everything that could be controlled had been controlled. The baby came 3 weeks early, on a frigid February night during a storm that trapped them at the ranch without any possibility of getting to town or bringing Mrs. Patterson out. Marina's labor started just after midnight, and Elias felt panic unlike anything he'd experienced in his life as he realized they were facing this alone. "It's fine," Marina said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. "Women have been having babies without help for thousands of years. We'll manage." "Marina, I don't know what to do. I've helped birth calves and foals, but never—" "Then you have more experience than many husbands." Marina gripped his hand so hard he felt bones grind together. "Elias, I need you to be calm. Can you do that? Can you help me through this?" He could. He did. Through the longest night of Elias's life, he stayed by Marina's side, offering water when she needed it, supporting her through contractions, following her increasingly exhausted instructions as the labor progressed. Dawn was breaking gray and cold when their daughter finally arrived, entering the world with a furious wail that was the most beautiful sound Elias had ever heard. "A girl," Marina breathed, tears streaming down her face as Elias placed their daughter on her chest. "Oh, Elias, look at her. She's perfect." She was, tiny and red-faced and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and impossibly small fingers that gripped Elias's thumb with surprising strength when he offered it to her. "What should we name her?" Elias asked, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. Marina looked down at their daughter, then out the window at the Montana landscape that had brought them together. "Hope," she said softly, "after the foal, because that's what she represents, hope for the future, hope that we can build something lasting, hope that love and commitment and hard work can create something beautiful even in the harshest conditions." "Hope Heart," Elias said, testing the name. "I like it." "Hope Heart," Marina repeated and smiled through her exhaustion. "Welcome home, little one." The years that followed blurred together in the way that happy years do, marked by the steady accumulation of moments rather than dramatic events. Hope grew from infant to toddler to a wild-haired little girl who followed Elias everywhere, chattering constantly and asking endless questions about the ranch. A son followed 3 years later, Thomas, named for Marina's father, and then another daughter 2 years after that, whom they called Grace after Tempest's filly. The ranch expanded as Elias had dreamed, growing to support not just cattle, but the horse breeding operation he'd wanted. Marina's gardens flourished, providing food for their growing family and enough extra to sell in town. The cabin grew too, expanding from 2 rooms to 6 as their family filled it with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of children. Some evenings, after the children were finally asleep and the ranch was quiet, Elias and Marina would sit together on the porch, the same porch where they'd had so many conversations in those early days, and watch the sun set over the valley they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked one such evening, the question he'd promised himself he'd never stop asking because he never wanted to take her presence for granted. "Coming here? Choosing this life?" Marina looked at him with gray eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of years of hard work and deep satisfaction, and smiled the same smile that had terrified him that first day, because he'd known instinctively it had the power to change everything. "How could I regret finding the one place I finally belong?" she said, the same words she'd spoken years ago, but with even more certainty now. "I was disappearing in Philadelphia, Elias, fading away bit by bit until I would have been nothing. But here I matter. My work matters. Our children will grow up knowing their mother matters, knowing both their parents built something real and lasting together. How could I possibly regret that?" Elias pulled her close, this woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach 10 years ago and transformed his entire world. She was older now, as was he. Both of them marked by sun and wind and hard work, both of them carrying scars from the challenges they'd faced. But they'd faced every challenge together, building not just a ranch but a life, not just a marriage but a partnership that had proven stronger than any obstacle Montana could throw at them. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now after years of practice. "More than the day I married you, more than yesterday, more than I'll be able to express tomorrow. You saved me, Marina. From loneliness, from fear, from a half-life spent hiding from everything that mattered." "We saved each other," Marina corrected, leaning into his warmth. "I was drowning in that city, and you threw me a lifeline even though you were terrified to do it. We saved each other, and then we built something neither of us could have built alone." From inside the cabin came the sound of Hope calling for water, and Marina sighed but smiled. "Duty calls. Even after all these years, they still need us." "They always will," Elias said, standing and helping her up. "That's what family means." They walked inside together, side by side as always, ready to face whatever came next. Whether it was a child who needed comfort, a storm that threatened their livelihood, or just another ordinary day of building the extraordinary life they'd created together. And as Elias settled Hope back into sleep, listening to Marina soothe Thomas in the next room while Grace snored softly in her crib, he felt the same overwhelming gratitude he'd felt that first night after their wedding. The same wonder that this life was real, was his, was everything he'd never dared to imagine he could have. He'd wanted simple. He'd wanted plain and practical and uncomplicated. Instead, he'd gotten Marina, beautiful and brilliant and impossibly stubborn, who'd fought past every defense he'd erected and shown him that the best things in life were worth the risk of loving them completely. The Montana Territory was harsh and unforgiving, testing everyone who tried to make a life in its vast spaces. But Elias and Marina Hart had proven that even in the harshest conditions, love could not only survive but thrive, growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. They'd built something that would outlast them both, Not just in the ranch they'd expanded or the children they'd raised, but in the example they set of what partnership truly meant, of what it looked like when two people chose each other every single day, through hardships and triumphs, through storms and sunshine, through all the mundane moments and magnificent milestones that made up a life. The loner rancher who'd waited for a simple mail-order bride had gotten so much more than he'd asked for. He'd gotten a partner, a wife, a lover, a friend, a fellow dreamer and builder and fighter. He'd gotten someone who saw past his walls to the man beneath, who chose him not despite his flaws but including them, who loved him with a fierceness that matched Montana's wildness. And in return, he'd given her a home, not just a physical place, though the ranch was certainly that, but something deeper. A place where she mattered, where her strength was valued, where she could be wholly herself without apology or diminishment. A place where she belonged so completely that leaving it was unthinkable. Together, they'd proven that sometimes the best things in life come not from careful planning, but from taking risks, from opening closed hearts, from believing that hope, however terrifying, is always worth embracing. And on warm Montana evenings, when the work was done and the children were settled and the ranch stood peaceful under vast starry skies, Elias Hart would often ask his wife the same question he'd asked 100 times before. "Do you ever regret coming here? To me?" And Marina Hart would always smile, the same smile that had changed everything, and answer with absolute certainty. "How could I regret finding the one place I finally belong?" And that, in the end, was the only answer that mattered, the only truth worth building a life around, the only story worth telling.